Section 1. The nuclear power plant and what it has done to Springfield. The Springfield nuclear power plant has 342 safety violations on the books. The cooling towers are cracked and held together with chewing gum. Radioactive waste is being dumped directly into the rivers that the town drinks from and fishes in and lets its children play near. Radioactive waste is also being dumped onto children's playgrounds, which is not a joke, that is what is happening. Plutonium is being used as a paperweight on someone's desk inside the facility. The rats that live in the lower levels of the plant glow faintly in the dark. And somewhere in the basement, the show mentions this detail exactly once, and then moves immediately away from it and never comes back. There are human skeletons. Bones. The remains of what were presumably once people, sitting inside an active nuclear facility, and nobody in the town of Springfield has ever asked who they were or how they ended up there. The man responsible for making sure none of that happens is Homer Simpson. His IQ has been publicly stated by the show's creator to be approximately 55. He falls asleep at his workstation on a regular basis. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He once, in a canonical episode, threw a donut into the reactor core to see if the radiation would make it grow bigger. He is the safety inspector of a nuclear power plant. He is the person legally and professionally responsible for ensuring that a facility with 342 documented safety violations does not poison an entire town. He has been failing at this job for over 3 decades, and he will go on failing at it for as long as the show continues to exist. That is the situation we are starting from tonight. And the reason it matters, the reason it is worth holding in your mind as we go through the next several hours, is that once you stop treating the power plant as a recurring background joke and start treating it as the central fact around which Springfield is organized, almost everything else in the show stops looking like cartoon logic. It starts looking like evidence. Let us take it piece by piece. The plant is Springfield's primary source of electrical power. Every home, every business, every school and hospital and government office in Springfield is drawing its electricity from a facility with 342 documented safety violations. The cost to bring it into compliance with basic regulatory standards was estimated at $56 million. Charles Montgomery Burns, who owns and operates the plant, is a billionaire by any accounting the show has provided. He could spend $56 million without meaningfully affecting his financial situation. He refused to spend it. His reason was not financial. He refused because to spend it would require formally acknowledging that the violations existed, and acknowledging that the violations existed would invite questions about what 3 decades of those violations had already done to the people living downwind of those cracked towers. The violations themselves are worth sitting with, because the tendency is to treat them as background texture, as color that establishes Burns as a cartoonishly negligent villain, and to then move on without really absorbing what they describe. But think about what the specific violations mean. Radioactive waste is being disposed of directly into bodies of water, not near bodies of water, into them. The rivers and streams that Springfield's residents use for drinking water, for fishing, for swimming, for letting their children play, are actively receiving radioactive material from the plant. Radioactive waste is also being deposited onto children's playgrounds. This is not a near miss or a potential risk, or a violation of some abstract regulatory standard that might in theory cause harm at some point in the future. Radioactive material is being placed in the specific outdoor spaces where children spend their time playing. Plutonium is sitting on someone's desk as a paperweight. The cooling towers, which are the structures responsible for managing the thermal output of an active nuclear reactor, and which, if they fail, make everything else catastrophically worse, are cracked, and those cracks have been patched not with any engineered material but with whatever happened to be at hand, which was chewing gum. The rats in the facility's lower levels glow faintly in the dark, which means they are carrying enough radioactive material in their bodies to be biologically luminescent. And somewhere in the basement, there are human skeletons, and no one has ever explained who those people were. The show drops the skeleton detail once and moves on. The episode does not pause. Characters do not react with the kind of sustained alarm that human skeletons in a workplace would typically generate. The bones are there, they are shown, and then the narrative continues as if the bones were a piece of set dressing no more remarkable than a filing cabinet or a water cooler. And nobody in Springfield, in any subsequent episode, has ever raised the question of who those people were or why their remains ended up inside a working nuclear facility. This is where you begin to understand something about Springfield that is not immediately obvious from watching the show casually. In Season 2, a three-eyed fish named Blinky is caught in a river that runs near the plant. The fish becomes national news within the show's world. A candidate for governor of the state uses Blinky as the centerpiece of his environmental campaign, citing the fish as direct and visible evidence that Burns is contaminating Springfield's water supply. Burns is eventually maneuvered into eating the fish on live television in an attempt to demonstrate that the fish is harmless and that the contamination narrative is overblown. The town watches Burns eat the three-eyed fish, and then the town shrugs, and then the town moves on. No independent water testing is ordered. No follow-up environmental study is commissioned. No regulatory body steps in to investigate. Nobody in Springfield asks the question that should have been the first question on everyone's mind the moment that fish came out of the river. If the fish in the water near this plant have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who drink the same water? The show answered this question in Season 8, embedded in an episode that the audience mostly received as a comedic science fiction story. In the Springfield Files, Homer is walking home through the woods near town when he encounters a glowing figure moving between the trees. The episode builds around this sighting, spiraling outward into alien conspiracy territory, bringing in FBI agents and causing a town-wide panic. The reveal, when it comes, is that the glowing figure is Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with radiation therapy and experimental pharmaceutical intervention, that after each session his body glows, visibly. With a green light that is not a metaphor or an artistic choice or a production effect used for comedic purposes. Burns's body, after each treatment, literally emits radiation in the visible light spectrum. He stumbles out of the treatment facility in a dazed and euphoric state and wanders through the forest near town, glowing in the dark. And when Springfield's residents see a glowing figure walking through the trees near their homes, their first thought is not radiation. Their first thought is not the nuclear plant that they can see from most of the town's windows on a clear day. Their first thought, the thought that spreads through the entire community and brings federal investigators to Springfield, is that the figure must be an alien from outer space. That is how completely the connection between the plant and what they observe around them has been severed in Springfield's collective imagination. A glowing humanoid figure stumbles through the woods near a nuclear power plant, and an entire town concludes, alien. That tells you something about the cognitive state of the people living there. And then the Simpsons movie provides the clearest and most undeniable statement of what Springfield actually is. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point severe enough that the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, operating within the show's world as a real regulatory agency with real authority, determines that the town poses a contamination risk too severe for standard remediation approaches. The solution they implement is a glass dome, physically constructed over the entire town of Springfield to prevent its pollution from spreading outward to the rest of the country. The United States government looked at Springfield and classified it as an environmental hazard requiring physical containment, not a town with some pollution problems, a contamination zone that had to be sealed. And every person who had been living inside that zone, everyone who had been drinking the water and breathing the air and living under the shadow of those towers for years or decades, was still inside when the dome came down. Now look at the residents. Homer Simpson has an enormous overbite that goes well beyond the range of normal human dental anatomy. His eyes protrude significantly past what you would see on a person in any real photograph. He has 4 fingers on each hand, a trait he shares with every single permanent resident of Springfield without exception. His skull has a shape that does not correspond to standard human cranial geometry. His IQ qualifies as clinical cognitive impairment by any recognized diagnostic framework. And despite all of this, his body is functionally indestructible. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted with enough current to stop a healthy heart. He has been hit by cars at speed and fallen from heights that would end the life of any ordinary person, and survived explosions at close range and walked away from every single one of these events without any lasting damage. His healing rate is not within the biological range of the human body. His pain tolerance exceeds what the human nervous system is designed to be able to sustain. Homer has been working in direct proximity to an active nuclear reactor core every working day of his adult life. Marge Simpson has the same protruding eyes, the same 4 fingers. Her hair rises straight up from her head and holds its exact shape for 36 years of episodes without any visible product or maintenance. She was employed at the nuclear plant herself for a period, exposed to the same violations and the same chronic radiation as Homer. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie were all born in Springfield. They have all lived there every day of their lives. They have all been drinking the same water and breathing the same air. All three display the same physical traits that appear in every Springfield permanent resident and in no one who visits from anywhere else. The spiky hair, the overbites, the eyes, and the yellow skin, specifically, that covers every person who lives in Springfield and no one who comes from outside. That last point is the one that makes the radiation theory click into focus as something more than a fan theory. When celebrities visit Springfield, when guest characters arrive from the outside world, they look different from Springfield's permanent residents. Their proportions are closer to what you would see if you looked at an actual photograph of an actual human being. Their eyes are sized more normally relative to their faces. Their features have a quality of conventional human anatomy that is visually distinct from the features of Springfield's permanent population. The standard explanation for this that most viewers have accepted is that this is simply the art style of the show. Outsiders are drawn differently for aesthetic reasons of character design. That is just how The Simpsons looks. But within the show's own internal logic, within the world that the show has constructed and maintained for 36 years, there is a visible and observable difference between the people who live inside Springfield and the people who come from outside it. The people inside the zone that the federal government eventually classifies as an environmental hazard requiring physical containment look like they have been altered by something. The people outside it look like people. If you take the show's own geography and its own internal reality seriously as a consistent system, you have to grapple with what that difference means. It means the residents of Springfield do not look the way they look because of an art style choice. They look the way they look because of something that has been done to them by the environment they live in. And then there is the animal evidence. The Simpson family dog has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same proportional peculiarities that distinguish Springfield residents from every outsider who walks through. Blinky the three-eyed fish was caught in water that runs past the plant. The show presents Blinky explicitly as proof of what the radiation is doing to living organisms in the local environment. It tells you directly through Blinky. The fish that live near this plant are being altered. They have 3 eyes. That is what the radiation does. And then the show continues for 30 more seasons, expecting you to accept that the exact same radiation has had no effect on the humans living in the same environment, drinking the same water, breathing the same air. Burns knows. He has always known. He understands the relationship between radiation and biological systems better than anyone in Springfield, not because he has studied it academically, but because he has been managing its effects in his own body for over a century. His body is a continuous living demonstration of what radiation does at high and sustained doses. He knows what his plant does because his own body shows him every week. And Homer's continued employment at the facility is not carelessness on Burns's part. When German investors briefly took over the plant and fired Homer immediately, then commissioned a compliance assessment and nearly went bankrupt from the estimate, Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer within weeks. A competent safety inspector would shut the facility down. Homer's incompetence ensures it stays operational, keeps the violations running, keeps the contamination ongoing, keeps Burns's monopoly over the town's power supply, and through that his control over the town's economy, and through that his effective control over the town's population. The crayon is the final piece of this picture. In Season 12, the show reveals that a crayon has been physically lodged in Homer's brain since childhood, pressing against specific neural structures, measurably and continuously suppressing his cognitive function. When a doctor removes it, Homer's intelligence rises dramatically. He becomes articulate. He becomes capable of sustained reasoning. He becomes able to perceive the world around him with clarity he has never had access to before. He sees Springfield clearly for the first time. He sees his job. He sees his employer. He sees the structure of his situation and what has been done to him and what continues to be done. And it makes him miserable. Because he can understand it and cannot change any of it. So he has the crayon put back. He chooses the fog. He chooses to return to cognitive impairment because being clear-eyed inside Springfield without the capacity to alter your situation is a form of suffering that is worse than not understanding it at all. But here is the question the show never asks. How did a crayon end up in a child's skull without any doctor in Springfield ever finding it? Homer had medical care throughout his childhood, regular checkups, the ordinary ongoing contact with the healthcare system that happens across years of growing up. Not one practitioner, across years of visits, ever found a foreign object in his skull. Either every doctor in Springfield is operating below any recognizable standard of competence, or someone in Springfield's medical infrastructure knew the crayon was there and chose not to remove it. If Burns's influence extends into the town's healthcare system, and there is no obvious reason to believe it does not, then the crayon is not an accident. It is a maintenance mechanism, a way of keeping the safety inspector cognitively suppressed at precisely the level Burns needs him. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because the contamination has disrupted the biological mechanisms of normal cellular aging. The town resets after disasters because the population's capacity for sustained critical memory has been compromised by chronic exposure. Homer survives things that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation in ways that make it physically extraordinary while leaving him cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive because he has the resources to manage his own exposure in ways that nobody else in Springfield can access. Nobody questions any of it, because the same process that mutated their bodies has also damaged the part of their brains responsible for asking why. Springfield is not a quirky animated town. It is a contamination zone. The residents are not charmingly eccentric. They are symptomatic. And the plant that powers their homes and employs their neighbors and dominates their skyline is not background scenery. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every four-fingered hand, every impossible recovery from something that should be fatal, every catastrophe forgotten by the next episode, every smooth reset to normal, all of it comes back to the same cracked towers, leaking the same invisible substance into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that cannot figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers, and nothing in this town ever seems to change. If you are settling in for tonight, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. We like knowing who is out there. And if this is the right kind of thing for your night, subscribing is how you find your way back. Section 2. Homer's Coma Theory. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired on Fox. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise involved a series of escalating April Fool's pranks that Bart played on Homer, each one getting larger and more dangerous than the last, until the final prank sent Homer to the hospital. While Homer was recovering in his hospital bed, he saw a vending machine across the room and reached for a candy bar. The machine tipped over and landed on him. Homer flatlined. He entered a coma. The show told you he woke up. Bart sat at his bedside in tears and confessed that the whole escalating chain of events had started with his pranks, that he was sorry, that he had done this. Homer sprang awake and immediately began strangling his son. The family laughed. Homer laughed, though he noted that he did not understand why he was laughing. The episode ended. The Simpsons continued for 32 more seasons as if nothing had fundamentally changed, except for one detail. In the final moments of that same episode, before the credits, the show noted that Homer had lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. Permanently. Gone. Not recoverable. And Homer's response to learning that he had sustained permanent brain damage was to laugh uncontrollably at information he could not process. The family found this charming. Nobody in the episode treated it as the alarming thing it is. And the show moved on. The coma theory says Homer never woke up. This is the Homer coma theory, and it is the most popular, most debated, and most internally consistent fan theory in the history of this show. The version that has circulated most widely online was first articulated by a Reddit user whose post laid out the basic argument and assembled the evidence in a form that made it difficult to dismiss. The premise is simple. Homer did not regain consciousness in that hospital room in April 1993. Every episode that has aired since then, every storyline and adventure and guest appearance and impossible plot is a dream. It is the dream of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing whatever brain function he has left, while his family sits beside him and waits. And the evidence, when you look at it carefully, is genuinely unsettling. The most immediately visible piece is the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. It was always a cartoon, always satirical, but the stories dealt with recognizable human problems rooted in situations that real families actually navigate. Homer tries to quit drinking and tries again and fails again in exactly the way people fail at giving things up. Not cleanly, but in stages, in setbacks and rationalizations and small victories that do not last. Marge considers whether she might have feelings for someone else and has to sit with the discomfort of that consideration and what it might mean about her marriage and her life. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher, and the episode treats the emotional texture of that experience, the particular confusion and intensity of a very smart child's first serious infatuation, with honesty. Bart faces academic failure, real academic failure with real consequences, including the genuine possibility of being held back a grade, and the episode takes that seriously even as it finds the comedy in it. These are the kinds of things that actual families go through. The particular weight of financial stress and marital friction and academic failure and the complicated love that parents and children carry for each other even when they are driving each other completely insane. After the coma, the show transforms completely. Homer goes to space. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society with elaborate rituals and mysterious connections. Homer discovers his mother has been alive this whole time, living as a federal fugitive for 27 years. Homer meets God in a direct face-to-face canonical conversation. Then Homer meets God again. The show that began as a grounded portrait of a recognizable American family working-class household becomes a show where the main character has traveled to dozens of countries, held hundreds of jobs across wildly different fields, befriended an improbable number of famous people, and survived physical damage that would reliably end the life of a trained and experienced combat soldier many times over. The shift is so dramatic and so sustained that fans have been debating it for 2 decades, arguing about when the show changed and what was lost. The coma theory gives a precise answer. The Simpsons did not change. Homer's brain changed. What the audience registers as a decline in the show's quality or coherence is actually a degradation in the cognitive function of the man who is dreaming each episode. Here is the detail that makes the theory haunt you even after you have heard it and thought about it and moved on from it. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere, an episode called Homer the Heretic, Homer has an actual face-to-face conversation with God. This is canonical. This is within the show's own established reality, not a dream sequence, not a metaphor, not a vision. Homer and God have a direct exchange, and during that exchange, God tells Homer something specific. Homer will one day learn the true meaning of life, God says, but not yet. His time is coming. Not yet. Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. Sit with that for a moment. In the season 4 premiere, God tells Homer within the show's own canonical reality that his time is approaching. 6 months after that, Homer's conscious life ends. What the show presents as a quirky theological moment, a comedic exchange between Homer and a surprisingly warm and personable deity, reads under the coma theory as something else entirely. It reads as a warning. A gentle and indirect notification that Homer's waking life was measured in months and that what came after would be something different. Something that felt like life, but was not. The dream of a man who went to sleep in a hospital room and could not find his way back out. The aging problem is where the coma theory becomes the most precise explanation available. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years of episodes. Lisa has been 8. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle or a gray hair. Maggie has been 1 year old since the beginning and will presumably continue to be 1 year old indefinitely. The standard explanation is the floating timeline convention, a production practice in which the show's present is always the viewer's present, meaning the characters exist in a kind of eternal contemporary moment that slides forward in time without them aging within it. This is accurate as a description of what the show does. It is how long-running animated programs work. But it is a production explanation, not a story explanation. It explains why the show does not depict its characters aging. It does not explain why, within the show's own internal reality, the characters do not age. The coma theory does explain this, with more precision and more emotional weight than any other available framework. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993 and has not had a new experience since. His dreaming brain cannot imagine what his children look like at 15 or 25 or 40 because he was not there to see it. The last image it holds of Bart is the image of a 10-year-old boy, so it loops back to that image. It holds it there. It replays it across every episode because that is all it has to work from. Marge does not age because the last time Homer's waking eyes saw her, she looked exactly like she looks in every episode you have ever watched. His brain cannot extrapolate forward from that image to what she looks like now, in whatever the actual present is, because it has been unconscious the entire time. Homer's coma dream preserves his world at the moment he lost it, because that is what comas do to the mind. They freeze the last experience. They lock you in place. And every episode since April 1993 is the loop of a man holding on to the last image of the people he loves, playing it back over and over because it is the only version he has. The celebrity appearances that became a defining feature of the show's later seasons take on a specific character under this framework. Homer is lying in a hospital bed. The television in the room is sometimes on. Nurses and doctors and family members have conversations nearby. The ambient noise of a working hospital filters through the margins of his unconsciousness. Names reach him through the haze. Famous names that the television or the radio or overheard conversations carry into the room. His dreaming brain picks them up and incorporates them into the ongoing simulation. That is why later Springfield is visited by so many famous people from so many different fields. It is not that the town became a celebrity magnet. It is that Homer's brain is absorbing fragments of sound from a hospital environment and translating them into characters who can play roles in the dream he is running. The show acknowledged this theory directly in season 34. A deliberately crafted fake deleted scene was produced in which Homer wakes from a long coma and the reveal is made that every impossible adventure since the original coma episode was a dream. It was fully animated. It was fully voiced. Real production resources were committed to the depiction, and then the show denied it, called the scene a hoax planted by hackers. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in 2015 and said it is not true, dismissed it as fan speculation, moved on. But here is what Al Jean did not address. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He did not explain the aging freeze in terms of the show's own internal logic, rather than in terms of production convention. He did not explain why the show becomes progressively stranger and more detached from any recognizable reality with each passing season, exactly as you would expect from a dreaming brain whose function is slowly and steadily declining over years. He said it is not true, and the interview moved on. The theory persists because it does something no official explanation has managed. It makes the entire show make sense from the inside. All of it. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the reset button at the end of every episode, the fact that Homer can survive literally anything because nothing is actually happening to his physical body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one running the story. And his mind will not end the story because ending the story means one of two things. Homer wakes up and discovers how many years have gone by, how old his children really are, whether Marge is still there, or whether she eventually made the decision most people in her position would have to consider after enough time. Or Homer does not wake up at all, and the dream simply stops in the middle of whatever episode was running, and Springfield ceases to exist. He will not let either of those things happen. Every reset at the end of an episode, every restored status quo, every time the credits roll and Bart is still 10 and Lisa is still 8 and everything is fine, that is Homer's brain refusing to write the final scene. Because writing the final scene means letting go. And letting go means losing the only thing Homer Simpson has ever truly and deeply wanted. He wants his family. That is the whole of it. He wants Marge to still love him the way she did before the accident. He wants Bart to still be his loud, mischievous, infuriating, beloved boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing saxophone in her room at exactly the volume that fills the house without being too loud. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to carry in one arm. He wants to come home through the front door of the house on Evergreen Terrace at the end of the day and find all four of them there, exactly as he remembers them, exactly as they were. In the coma, he gets all of that, forever. As many times as the dream can run, for as long as the brain can sustain it, the family is there, waiting, exactly as he left them. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the most complete version of the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. The beer is always cold. The television is always on. The family is always home. The kids are always young enough to need him. The house is always full. And nobody ever has to grow up. And nobody ever has to leave. And nobody ever has to say goodbye. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. It makes every episode an act of love. A dying man dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. And every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and everything is back to normal, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, Homer wakes up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed. Whether Marge waited, whether Bart has grown, whether Maggie is still small enough to hold, or worse, not waking up at all. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before we go any further with this one, let us acknowledge what the show told us. Season 7, Episode 1. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 2. The investigation concludes. Burns wakes up from his coma. He identifies his attacker. It was Maggie. Baby Maggie Simpson. She was in the parking lot. He tried to take her lollipop. His gun fell from its holster during the struggle. She picked it up. It discharged. Case closed. The show committed to this. The writers have stated it on the DVD commentary. The official answer is Maggie. And yet the case has never felt fully closed to anyone who looked at it carefully. The evidence does not assemble into the answer the show provides as cleanly as the official resolution pretends. The clues do not point where the show says they point, and the more carefully you examine the investigation, the more it begins to resemble something that was not fully solved, but was instead declared solved, which are not the same thing. Let us go back to the setup. Burns had spent the final arc of Season 6 doing damage to virtually every named character in Springfield, in ways that were specific and personal and cumulative. He stole an oil well from directly beneath Springfield Elementary School, which gutted the school's budget and eliminated programs that teachers and students had spent years building. He engineered the financial ruin of Moe's Tavern, shutting it down. He caused geological instability that physically destroyed the Springfield retirement castle. He injured Santa's little helper. He fired Smithers, his longtime personal assistant, and the person who had devoted his professional life to Burns's service, when Smithers had the decency to object on moral grounds to one of Burns's plans. And for his final act, Burns constructed and deployed a device designed to block the sun over the entire town of Springfield, with the explicit purpose of forcing every resident to purchase their electricity exclusively from his plant, because with the sun blocked, there would be no alternative energy source available. By the end of Part 1, every single named character in Springfield had a specific, documented, personal reason to want Burns dead or, at minimum, seriously harmed. The show took its time establishing this. Homer, because Burns had spent years being unable to remember his name despite Homer working for him throughout his entire adult career, an indignity that had been building toward a breaking point across many earlier episodes. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding. Grandpa Simpson, because the retirement castle was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job in the resulting budget collapse. Tito Puente, because Burns eliminated the school's music program, which Puente taught. Moe, because his bar was gone. Smithers, because he had just been fired after devoting his life to Burns's service. The whole town gathered to confront Burns at a public meeting. Multiple characters were shown in possession of weapons, and then Burns got shot. He staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on two letters, W and S, or, from Burns's own perspective lying where he had fallen, M and S. The screen went dark. America waited through the entire summer. Part 2 aired in September. The investigation was conducted by Chief Wiggum and the Springfield Police, with the thoroughness and rigor that viewers of this show would expect from Chief Wiggum and the Springfield Police. Smithers confessed almost immediately, which is typically how these things go in mystery stories, and his confession immediately fell apart when it emerged that he had been completely blackout drunk during the relevant time period and had actually discharged his weapon into old Jasper's wooden leg at a location several miles away from where Burns was shot. Suspects were cleared through alibis one by one. Tito Puente provided what remains one of the most creative alibis in the history of television, a fully performed musical number demonstrating that he had channeled his rage into a samba composition, which is an alibi that only works in Springfield. Police found an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis matched a Simpson family member. Homer's fingerprints were found on the gun. Homer had the most clearly stated and most emotionally charged motive of any suspect in the case. He was arrested and came close to conviction before Burns woke up and named Maggie. Now here is what does not hold together: the national contest. Fox told the audience the mystery was solvable from the clues embedded in Part 1 and invited them to prove it. A prize of being animated into a future episode was promised to the winner. According to the DVD commentary, which includes the episode's writers discussing the production directly, not a single entry in the randomly selected sample of thousands of submissions guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was awarded at random to someone who did not have the right answer, so they received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance. The writers note on the commentary that they became aware of exactly one person who had correctly identified the shooter online using a college internet account on the night of the original broadcast, but that the account had gone inactive before the contest concluded and they could not locate the person. They issued an open invitation in the DVD release for this person to come forward. As far as any public record shows, they never did. This matters significantly. The show explicitly told its audience the mystery was solvable from the available evidence, promoted a national contest around this claim, and when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody in a massive sample of engaged and motivated viewers had reached the correct conclusion. Either the clues were insufficient to support the answer, the red herrings were so effective they overwhelmed whatever genuine evidence existed, or the answer did not follow logically from the available evidence in the way the show claimed it would. Look at the specific clues. Burns falls and his hands land on the letters W and S. The show explains that from Burns's own perspective, as he lay where he had fallen, these appeared as M and S, Maggie Simpson. Case closed. Except Burns himself stated, within Part 2, canonically and on the record, that his hands landing on those specific letters was not intentional. He did not position himself as he fell to leave a clue identifying his attacker. He simply fell and his hands went where they went. The physical positioning of his hands on the sundial, which is presented as the central piece of evidence used to justify the official answer, was explicitly described by the victim himself as a coincidence. Burns said it directly. The sundial pointing to MS was not deliberate. He fell. His hands landed somewhere. The most famous clue in the show's history means nothing, and the person it supposedly came from said so. The gun presents a separate problem. Burns carried a firearm in a holster. At some point before the shooting, the holster was shown to be empty. The gun had already left Burns's person before the attack occurred. Whoever shot Burns used a weapon they either found after it had fallen from Burns's holster or had taken from him at some earlier point in the evening. This matters because most of the primary suspects came to the town meeting armed. They had brought weapons specifically because their anger at Burns had reached the point where they were preparing for serious confrontation. But the person who shot Burns with his own gun was someone who had not come to the meeting planning to shoot anyone, who encountered the weapon by chance and acted on impulse. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does any number of other characters who were present that evening without bringing their own weapons. Burns's last words before being shot, noted specifically within the episode, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not startled. He was not afraid the way you would be if an unknown and unexpected threat appeared. He greeted the approaching figure with the specific tone and phrasing of mild recognition, the verbal acknowledgement of a familiar face appearing in an unexpected context. Does Burns have any established prior relationship with Maggie Simpson? Has any canonical episode depicted Burns interacting with Maggie in a way that would explain his responding to her arrival with, "Oh, it's you?" the way one might greet a known acquaintance? The show does not establish any meaningful prior connection between them. Burns can barely acknowledge Homer's existence after years of Homer working for him. The idea that Burns would look at a one-year-old infant and respond with the specific inflection of familiar recognition is difficult to reconcile with what the show has established about how Burns perceives and relates to the world around him. Then there is the season 18 moment that the show introduces and then refuses to engage with in any way. Homer says on camera, without apparent prompting from the context of what is happening in the episode, that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says it out loud. Nobody in the scene reacts. Nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody suggests reopening the case. Homer Simpson verbally confesses to the attempted murder of the most powerful and wealthy man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line and immediately continues with whatever else is happening in the episode. Either Homer is constructing a false story for the kind of attention he periodically seeks, which his character does support in other contexts, or the original verdict was wrong, and Homer knows it, because he was the person who actually pulled the trigger. The Marge theory is the alternate reading that holds together most convincingly. Burns had spent the arc systematically destroying things Marge cared about: her children's school, her family's dog, her town's access to sunlight. A prior episode, Marge Gets a Job, had established that Burns developed an infatuation with Marge during a period when she worked at the plant, finding her genuinely appealing in whatever limited way Burns is capable of finding anything appealing. The theory holds that when Burns woke from his coma, he remembered who had shot him and chose not to identify her. He looked at the assembled family and the available suspects and pointed at the one person who could absorb the accusation without any possibility of legal consequence. Chief Wiggum stated it plainly in the episode: "No jury anywhere would convict a baby. Maggie was the ideal candidate to bear the accusation. She cannot deny it. She cannot testify. She cannot be prosecuted or punished. She will never fully understand what she is being accused of." If someone wanted to protect the real shooter, pointing at Maggie was the cleanest available solution. The alternate endings confirm that even the writers were not fully committed to Maggie as the answer throughout the production process. A complete alternate conclusion was produced with Smithers as the shooter, fully animated, fully voiced, with all the production resources of a finished and deliverable episode. The show screened this alternate ending in the 138th episode Spectacular Clip Show, and had the episode's host dismiss it by saying that ignoring the Simpson DNA evidence would be downright nutty, then immediately drawing a comparison to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had concluded that year with a verdict that required the jury to set aside DNA evidence. The show drew your specific attention to the fact that in real legal proceedings, official verdicts and correct answers are not guaranteed to correspond. Early drafts of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The answer was not arrived at by following the evidence to its logical conclusion. The evidence was adjusted to support whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The final image of Part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone else has gone. She looks around carefully, checking that no one is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. The show reads this as confession. You could equally read it as an infant who witnessed someone else shoot Burns, reenacting what she saw in private, the way young children reproduce behaviors they have observed without understanding the significance of those behaviors. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The writers stand behind it. But the contest nobody won, the central clue the victim himself called a coincidence, the fully produced alternate endings, Homer's unaddressed on-camera confession a decade later, and a final image that can support two completely different readings all point in the same direction. The greatest mystery in the show's history was not solved. It was closed. In Springfield, those have never been the same thing. Section 4. How is Mr. Burns still alive? This is not a rhetorical question, and it is not a joke about cartoon immortality. Within the established and documented canon of The Simpsons, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility, and the show has spent 36 seasons quietly and methodically building a specific and detailed explanation for how he remains functional. His age is the starting point. Every version of the timeline the show has established across its run places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. He has described personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century, in the tone and with the specific emotional texture of someone recounting first-hand experience, rather than something absorbed from books or from the stories of older people. He has spoken about the 1910s as though he was there, because he was. He served in the Second World War, and the details he provides about his conduct during that conflict have the specific quality of someone who experienced it rather than someone who read about it. He knew Howard Hughes personally, with the familiarity of a peer relationship rather than the admiration of a younger man for an older figure. He attended Yale at a time when Yale was a genuinely different institution. He has referenced the Gilded Age, the period of extreme concentrated wealth and industrial expansion in the United States in the late 1800s, not as a period of history he is informed about, but as something he lived through and feels nostalgic for. He obtained a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the Second World War and kept it for decades. He has working knowledge of events and figures that died out of living memory before most of the show's audience was born. By the most conservative reading of the full range of evidence the show has accumulated across 36 years of episodes, Burns is well over 100 years old. By a less conservative reading of the outer range of those historical references, he might be closer to 140, and he is not merely surviving in some ceremonial or diminished sense. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with active and strategic management. He manipulates the political systems of his town with a precision that requires current adaptive intelligence and a working understanding of modern finance, modern law, and modern technology. He conceives and executes long-term schemes that demand sustained strategic thinking, of the kind that does not survive significant cognitive decline in any recognizable form. His body is frail in ways the show has documented with some comedy. His physical strength is essentially non-existent. He cannot open a jar of pickles without mechanical assistance. He occasionally requires Smithers to physically support him, but his mind is sharp. Burns is arguably the most strategically capable character in all of Springfield, capable of outmaneuvering anyone in the town in any domain that does not require physical force. And he has been operating at that cognitive level for a span of time that exceeds what any documented human mind has maintained. The show addresses his longevity directly in the Springfield Files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen so extreme and so heavily loaded with radiation therapy and experimental pharmaceutical treatment that after each session his body emits a visible green glow. The treatment sustains him for exactly one more week. Without the following session, his body begins to fail. There is no margin. Miss a single appointment, and Burns does not fade gradually over months. He fails within days. His continued existence is not a natural biological state. It is an actively maintained condition, dependent on a precise schedule that cannot be skipped or deferred, the way you maintain a piece of precision machinery through mandatory scheduled servicing that must happen on time every time, or the machine begins to break down immediately. The treatment involves radiation. This deserves to be sat with, because of what it implies about the larger picture. The man who owns the nuclear power plant. The man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades. The man at the center of the theory about what the plant has done to the town and everyone in it. This man is personally and completely dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own basic biological function. Burns does not just profit from radiation, he is powered by it. His body, after over a century of proximity to nuclear material and over decades of deliberate therapeutic exposure, can no longer sustain itself through the ordinary cellular processes that biology normally provides to living organisms. He requires regular external radiation input, the way a healthy person in normal biological condition requires food and water and sleep. Remove it, and his system begins shutting down within the week. This provides the framework for one of the most quoted scenes in the entire run of the show. Burns visits a doctor who examines him thoroughly and delivers a diagnosis that the audience has always received as one of the funniest things the show has ever done. The doctor informs Burns that he has every disease known to modern medicine. Every single one. All of them simultaneously present in his body, all of them attempting to kill him at the same time. The doctor then explains why Burns is still alive despite this. Because every disease is present simultaneously, they exist in a state of perfect equilibrium. Each one cancels out all the others. None of them can advance to a killing stage because every pathway to killing him is blocked by something else that is also attempting to kill him through a different route. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. Three people trying to walk through a doorway at once and getting jammed together, unable to pass because each one is blocking all the others. The scene is funny and it has earned its reputation. But under the radiation framework, it describes something that has an internally coherent logic, even if that logic does not correspond to anything in conventional medicine. Burns's weekly treatments are not curing his diseases. They are not fighting the diseases in the direct way that a therapeutic intervention would fight a specific condition. They are maintaining the equilibrium. They are keeping every illness in his body in a state of precise stasis relative to every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining enough advantage over the others to begin advancing toward lethality. The treatment is calibration. Burns's body is a system. The weekly sessions are the mechanism by which that system is kept from going into the kind of catastrophic cascade failure that happens when the control rods are removed from a nuclear reactor. Burns is not being kept alive by medicine in any traditional sense. He is being kept alive the way a reactor is kept from going critical. Smithers is not primarily a devoted personal assistant, or even primarily the complicated emotional figure the show makes him in various episodes. He is the single most critical component of Burns's survival infrastructure. He manages the treatment schedule. He ensures Burns reaches every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's condition with a vigilance that borders on obsession and that the show has consistently portrayed as having a specifically physiological component, not just an emotional one. The show has established across multiple episodes, in multiple ways, that if Smithers left, Burns would become physically helpless in the most literal medical sense almost immediately. Without Smithers's logistical management, Burns misses a dose. Without a dose, the equilibrium that has been maintained by the treatments begins to break down. Each disease, no longer held in precise balance against every other disease, begins advancing through whatever route is available to it. Multiple conditions surge simultaneously. Nothing blocks any of them. Burns dies within days. Smithers's devotion to Burns is not entirely a free choice made from pure feeling. Part of it, a significant part of it, is the specific knowledge that his absence kills the person he is devoted to, and that knowledge changes the character of every choice he makes about leaving, about staying, about what his presence actually means within the dynamic between them. He is not there because he loves Burns, though the show makes that dimension real. He is there because he knows what happens to Burns if he is not there. And that knowledge is a different kind of bond than love, or at minimum, a different kind of weight within a bond that also includes love. Burns's connection to historical events and figures adds another dimension to the immortality picture. The show has placed Burns in personal contact with or personal knowledge of an improbable range of historical moments spanning from the late 19th century to the present. He knew Howard Hughes with peer-level familiarity. He attended Yale when it was a different institution. He served in the Second World War, and his conduct during the conflict, by his own casual admission, was morally compromised in ways he does not find particularly troubling. He obtained a $1 trillion bill from the U.S. government and kept it for decades. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution, and the Burns dynasty has maintained continuous, effective control of its assets across multiple centuries. This raises a question the show never directly addresses. Is Burns a singular case, or has his family always extended individual lifespans? If the dynasty has maintained continuous operational control for centuries, and if the current Burns has been alive for well over a century through artificial means, did previous Burns patriarchs use whatever was available to them to accomplish the same thing? Before nuclear radiation was a tool, before modern pharmaceutical intervention existed, before any of the specific technology currently keeping Charles Burns alive was developed, the show does not answer this. But it establishes the Burns dynasty's durational continuity with enough specificity that the question becomes impossible to ignore. The symbiotic relationship between Burns and Springfield is the final piece of the picture, and the most quietly unsettling part of it. Springfield's economy depends on the power plant. The plant's operation depends on Burns. Burns's survival depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the wealth the plant generates. The loop is closed. Springfield cannot meaningfully challenge Burns because Springfield cannot function economically without the activity the plant provides. Burns cannot be allowed to die, because dying would mean the system he built over a century would stop operating, and someone would have to account for what that system has done to the people living inside it. He is not immortal in any mystical sense. He is something more precisely unsettling. He is too expensive to die. The cost of his dying, to the system that depends on him staying alive, is higher than the system can absorb. And so he continues. Weekly treatments, scheduled to the day, managed by the one person whose absence ends everything. Alive not through biological luck or supernatural circumstance, but through the compounding result of money and infrastructure and a century of deliberate investment in the specific project of his own survival. Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if the treatment schedule holds, is a very long time indeed. Section 5. The episode that revealed Springfield. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper, the 28th of September, 1997. This episode has generated more sustained critical backlash and fan anger than almost anything else the show has done across its entire run. 27 years after it aired, people still cite it as the moment The Simpsons went wrong, the moment the writers stopped respecting their own continuity and their own characters. Harry Shearer, who has voiced Principal Skinner since the show's beginning, stated publicly that he was unhappy with the storyline. Critics called it a character assassination. Fan polls place it near the very bottom of the series ranking. But the fans have been reading the episode backward. For 27 years, they have been treating it as a creative failure when it is actually the most transparent and honest thing the show has ever done. It did not betray Springfield's reality. It showed the machinery of that reality with a directness the show has never matched before or since. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds a ceremony to honor Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school and the community. A stranger walks in partway through. Nobody recognizes him. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war, presumed killed, who survived his captivity, escaped, and came home to find someone else living inside his name and his life. The man Springfield has known as its school principal is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, he was a petty criminal, a young man from a difficult background with no meaningful prospects and no particular reason to expect any. He was drafted and served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed in the field, Tamzarian felt personally responsible for what had happened. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. Agnes was waiting for her son. In her grief, she reached for the nearest available comfort. She assumed Tamzarian was Seymour and held on to that assumption. And Tamzarian, who had never in his life been wanted by anyone and had never had a family or an identity worth keeping, let it stand. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name and the rank and the life and the relationships and the mother and lived inside all of it for 20 years until the real Skinner walked through a gymnasium door and the whole borrowed life collapsed. Now, here is the part fans found unforgivable, the part they have been calling a betrayal of continuity and a disregard for the audience for nearly 3 decades. The town holds a meeting, everyone is present. The real Seymour Skinner is there in the room, available to testify, with documentation, with the entirety of his identity and his history intact. Armin Tamzarian is there. The truth is completely and incontrovertibly established. Everyone in Springfield knows with total certainty that their school principal has been an imposter for 2 decades. There is nothing ambiguous. The actual man whose life was stolen is standing right in front of them. And the town votes, not on consequences for Tamzarian, not on how to restore the real Skinner's identity and rights, on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The vote is unanimous. Springfield chooses the lie. Judge Snyder issues a formal legal decree establishing that Armin Tamzarian is and will henceforth legally be considered the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the decorated war veteran who survived captivity and came home to find his life occupied, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of torture, to ever refer to what actually happened. The fans called this lazy writing. They said it destroyed everything the character had been built to represent. They treated it as evidence that the writers had stopped caring. It is not that. It is a document. Think about how many times, across 36 seasons, Springfield has experienced events that should, by any realistic accounting, permanently alter something. The town has been physically destroyed and rebuilt. It has been sealed under a federal dome as a classified environmental hazard. It has survived nuclear near misses and geological disasters and invasions, and the literal blocking of its sun. And every single time, without exception, by the following week's episode, everything is back to normal. The slate is clean. Nobody references what happened. The Simpsons are back on the couch and Springfield is Springfield, and the loop continues. This gets explained as episodic television structure. Self-contained episodes require a reset at the end. This is how the medium works. And that explanation is accurate and real. But the principal and the pauper suggest something operating alongside that production reality, something happening inside the show's own logic. Springfield resets not only because episodic television requires it, but because Springfield actively chooses to reset every time through a collective agreement that operates below the visible surface of the town's daily life. An agreement that says, we will not discuss what happened. We will maintain the version of events that we are all comfortable living inside. We will treat the agreed-upon story as the true story, and the true story as a criminal document. And we will remove anyone who insists on the true story. The Principal and the Pauper is the only episode that shows you this mechanism operating in real time. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, the forgetting happens off-screen, between episodes, invisible. You just arrive at the next episode and everything is normal and you accept it. This is the one time the show lets you watch the vote happen. Watch the decree get issued. Watch the man who represents the truth get tied to a train. Watch Springfield make its choice with full awareness of what it is choosing between. And the choice, as always, is the version of reality it can afford to live inside. Because consider what is actually at stake beneath the surface of that vote. If Springfield were to maintain sustained awareness of the lies built into its foundations, where does that awareness lead? If they acknowledge that their principal was an imposter, they have to acknowledge that official narratives in Springfield are not reliable. If official narratives are not reliable, they have to start looking at others. The plant, the water, the fish with 3 eyes, the billionaire who glows in the dark after his weekly medical treatment. Every reset, every agreed-upon amnesia serves the same structural function. It prevents the chain of questioning from beginning. If you remember the dome, you have to confront the pollution. If you confront the pollution, you have to challenge Burns. If you challenge Burns, the economy comes into question. If the economy comes into question, the town's survival comes into question. So Springfield votes to unknow the truth. It makes remembering illegal. It ties the messenger to a train. The real Seymour Skinner was the last honest man in Springfield at that moment. He came back from the war and from captivity with proof. His identity theft was total and undeniable. The truth he represented was not ambiguous. It was simply true. And Springfield's response to that absolute truth was a legal decree and a railroad car. Not because the town hated him, not because anyone particularly wanted the truth suppressed, but because the truth was more expensive than the lie. And Springfield has learned to choose the lie with the same institutional reflexivity that a body chooses to stop a wound from bleeding. And if the coma theory is true, this episode takes on one more dimension. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind produced a scenario where an entire town votes to sustain a fiction and criminalize the truth. Because Homer needs to believe this is possible. His own dream is exactly that kind of fiction, a substitute life running in place of the actual one. As long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain its version of reality, Homer's dream can continue. As long as the truth can be made illegal, the lie can stand. Armin Tamzarian's borrowed life and Homer's coma dream are the same structure. Both are fictions that have been agreed to be true. Both require the expulsion of anyone who insists on the actual facts. Armin Tamzarian is still Principal Skinner. The real Seymour Skinner is somewhere outside the town limits, expelled from his own life. Springfield is still pretending, as it always is. And that pretending is not a bug in the show's continuity management. It is the show's most direct statement about what Springfield is. Section 6. Maggie Simpson and the Silence That Knows Everything. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She does not speak in any sustained way. She communicates through pacifier movements, through pointed stares, through the occasional carefully directed gesture. She is, by every surface measure, the least consequential member of the family, the baby in the corner that the plot moves around rather than through. She shot a billionaire. She led an organized uprising in a daycare facility, planning and executing a successful resistance against a tyrannical caretaker with a level of strategic clarity that would impress a capable adult. She has intervened in multiple life-threatening situations affecting her family and prevented serious harm through actions that required her to assess the situation, identify the relevant variables, choose an approach, and execute it correctly under time pressure. She was tested for intelligence, and the results came back in ranges that the available instruments were not designed to capture. And through all of it, across 36 seasons of episodes, she has said almost nothing. Her first word was "Daddy." Elizabeth Taylor voiced it in a single cameo. One word, spoken once, with genuine warmth and weight, and then it was over. Maggie can speak. This is not ambiguous. The show has established her capacity for language clearly enough across enough instances and enough seasons that it cannot reasonably be read as genuine developmental delay or genuine inability. What she has chosen, with a consistency that becomes more striking and more clearly intentional the longer you look at the full pattern of it, is not to start with the most analyzed single moment in her history, the final shot of Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 2. The case has been closed. The family is gone. Maggie is alone in the room. She turns slowly, scanning each angle, checking that there is truly no one present. She confirms she is unobserved. And then she takes her pacifier and moves it in a precise and deliberate gesture that exactly replicates the mechanical action of pulling a trigger. She checked to make sure she was alone before she did it. Sit with what that behavioral sequence requires from a developmental perspective. The awareness that what you do can be observed, and that observation by others has consequences, is not an infant behavior. Infants do not yet fully model other minds as containing different information from their own. The specific checking of surroundings before performing an action, the verification that no one is watching before doing the thing you do not want watched, requires a cognitive capacity that emerges much later in normal development. It requires theory of mind, the understanding that other people have mental states distinct from yours, and that those mental states contain different information. It requires strategic impulse control, the ability to want to do something and be capable of doing it, but hold it until the conditions are favorable. It requires situational awareness that integrates environmental scanning with behavioral decision-making in real time. Theory of mind typically develops in children around age 3 to 4. Maggie demonstrates it in infancy in a context that involves managing the concealment of information related to a violent event. That is not basic theory of mind. That is sophisticated strategic theory of mind, deployed in a context with significant social and potentially legal consequence. The behavioral sequence in that final shot does not describe infant behavior. It describes the behavior of someone who is managing information carefully and understands exactly why they are managing it. The Longest Daycare is a short film from 2012 that received an Academy Award nomination for Animated Short Film, 7 minutes. Its entire purpose is to show you what Maggie's mind can do when it is given a problem to work through. She is dropped at a daycare facility that runs with rigid authoritarian efficiency and that categorizes the infants in its care by apparent intelligence, isolating those who test as gifted into a supervised and controlled environment designed to suppress whatever makes them different. Maggie is placed in the advanced section. She finds a caterpillar about to pupate. A bully among the other infants has targeted it for destruction. Maggie decides to protect it and get it out. What follows, across 7 wordless minutes, is Maggie conducting a systematic assessment of the environment she is in. She reads the spatial layout of the facility. She maps the locations and movement patterns of the threats she has identified. She inventories the materials available to her and thinks through how they might be deployed. She constructs a multi-stage plan with primary and secondary options. She executes the plan in sequence, adjusting timing to the behavior of the people around her. When something goes wrong, she does not panic or repeat the failed approach. She adapts and finds an alternative route to the same objective. She completes her goal. All of this without a single word, while physically constrained by the motor capabilities of a 1-year-old human body. She falls when she tries to run. She has to crawl when walking would be faster. Her body cannot execute what her mind is directing at the speed and precision her mind is working at. But every single decision she makes during that sequence is correct. Every adaptation is the best available response given her information and her constraints. She succeeds because her intelligence is capable of compensating for every limitation her body imposes on her. This is not infant cognition. Infants do not think this way. This is the kind of adaptive, multi-step, constraint-aware problem-solving that capable adults bring to complex professional situations. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence formally on multiple occasions across different seasons. The specific numbers are inconsistent because the show's continuity does not hold to precise figures across 36 years. But the pattern that emerges from those episodes, taken together, is not inconsistent. Every time her cognitive capability is measured within an episode's context, the result is the same: exceptional, off the scale, beyond what available instruments reliably capture. Each instance is delivered as a quick comedy beat and then dropped before the implication has time to fully register with the viewer. But the pattern across enough episodes produces a clear picture of something that is present and consistent and intentional. Maggie is cognitively extraordinary, and the people around her consistently fail to notice. That failure is structurally produced by how the household operates. Homer's crises are large and frequent and require immediate physical and emotional response from whoever happens to be nearby. Bart's provocations are loud and escalating, and specifically designed to capture and hold the attention of the adults in the room. Lisa's intellectual and emotional needs generate drama that pulls the household's focus in her direction. The Simpson family is a system running under constant high-volume pressure from multiple simultaneous directions. And in the middle of all of it, Maggie sits in her spot and watches and says nothing, and the family moves around her the way water moves around something solid and apparently unremarkable, without changing course, without pausing to look closely at what the obstacle actually is. She has maintained this dynamic through deliberate, consistent, sustained effort. Think carefully about what Lisa's experience demonstrates as data. Lisa wears her intelligence on the outside. She insists on it. She announces herself as the most capable person in the room and refuses to pretend otherwise. She challenges authority when authority is wrong. She advocates for what she believes in. She is honest about what she sees even when honesty produces resistance. And the world's response to all of that has been consistent across 36 years of episodes. Isolation, dismissal by adults who should be supporting her development, mockery from peers. She challenges authority and is punished for it. She fights for recognition and is denied it, or given it temporarily in ways the surrounding environment quickly absorbs without lasting change. Maggie has watched this from her spot in the family. She has watched the most capable member of the household fight every single day for acknowledgement and receive back a mix of dismissal and resistance and the occasional small victory that does not change the underlying dynamic. She has watched her brilliant sister be systematically undervalued by a community that is structured through whatever combination of mechanisms to resist the kind of intelligence Lisa represents. And she has drawn a lesson that Lisa cannot draw. Not because Lisa is less intelligent, but because Lisa's character is built on a commitment to honesty and advocacy that makes a different choice unavailable to her. The lesson Maggie drew is this: the less they see you, the less they can push back against you. The less they understand what you are doing, the more freedom you have to do it. Silence is not weakness. Silence is armor. Every remarkable thing Maggie has ever accomplished has happened in spaces the adults were not monitoring. She built those spaces herself by performing, with extraordinary and sustained consistency, exactly what everyone around her expects a baby to be: passive, quiet, dependent, requiring routine management but not presenting complexity or challenge. The performance has never broken. Not once in 36 years of episodes has any named character in the show seriously raised the question of whether Maggie's behavior might be a strategic choice rather than a natural developmental state. The performance is so complete and so consistent that it does not generate suspicion. It generates comfort. Maggie is fine. Maggie is in her spot. Maggie is just the baby. She is none of the things the performance suggests. She is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She has simply decided that the optimal strategy, given what she has observed about how Springfield treats visible capability, is not to be visible. Connect this to the radiation theory. If the contamination from the plant produces mutations that vary in their specific effects based on how a given organism's individual biology interacts with the exposure, then Homer and Maggie are the extreme ends of what that variation can produce. Homer's mutation reduced his cognitive function to the point of clinical impairment while making his body physically extraordinary. Maggie's mutation elevated her cognition to a point that available measurement cannot capture. Same water, same air, same household, same source material. Homer is what the radiation takes away from a person. Maggie is what the radiation can give. If the coma theory holds, Maggie's intelligence carries a different meaning. Homer cannot watch his youngest child grow. In a hospital bed in Springfield General, he cannot know what she becomes. His dreaming brain cannot extrapolate her future because it has no reference data. So his unconscious mind does what the deepest wishes of a parent do when given no constraints. It makes her already extraordinary. It gives her in the dream everything she would need to protect herself and navigate the world without him there. In the coma reading, her genius is not a mutation. It is a prayer. The most urgent and loving kind a parent can form when they cannot be present for the person who needs them. Maggie has never been shown as an adult in any flash-forward episode. The show has imagined adult Bart and adult Lisa, given them futures to inhabit for one episode at a time. Maggie remains at the threshold, perpetually approaching, becoming without ever crossing it. 36 seasons and the show has never shown you what Maggie becomes when the patience finally runs out and the calculation reaches its conclusion. But we have seen enough glimpses to understand the shape of what is waiting. She shot a man. She organized infants. She executes plans that capable adults cannot. She withholds information with strategic precision. She watches everything and forgets nothing and says nothing and waits. For what? The show has never said. And when she finally decides the moment has come, Springfield will not be ready. Nobody will be. Because she designed it that way. One long performance of helplessness. One sustained disguise so complete that when it finally drops, no one will be able to remember clearly the last time they looked at Maggie Simpson and actually wondered what she was thinking. She was thinking everything. She has always been thinking everything. She just decided you did not need to know that yet. Section 7. The predictions. Let us get the well-known ones out immediately. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. Her predecessor in the Oval Office is identified by name as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a personal communication device worn on the wrist that closely resembles what we now call a smartwatch. In 1998, Homer stood at a chalkboard and wrote a mathematical equation that a physicist later examined and identified as appearing to anticipate the mass of the Higgs boson particle, an elementary particle that would not be experimentally confirmed until 2012. In 1993, an episode called Margin Chains depicted a flu virus originating in Asia, spreading to Springfield, causing mass panic, supply shortages, quarantine debates, and a frantic and ultimately futile search for a cure that worked. That episode aired 27 years before COVID-19. During the chaos of that fictional outbreak, the panicking townspeople accidentally release a swarm of killer bees, which landed differently when Asian giant hornets, immediately branded by the media as murder hornets, appeared in the United States during the real 2020 pandemic. In 1996, the episode Homerpalooza featured a joke in which Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra for their concert while not entirely in a clear-headed state. That exact collaboration actually happened in 2024, when Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years after the joke was written. In 1998, the show depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox. That happened in 2019. The show has, across its run, depicted video calling technology, autocorrect failures, widespread surveillance culture, tablet computers, and the general experience of information overload all before any of those things became ordinary features of everyday life. The internet responds to each newly confirmed prediction with a combination of genuine amazement and something that starts to feel like suspicion. How are they doing this? The question spreads and gets asked again every time another one lands. The official answer from the people who actually make the show is blunt. Al Jean, executive producer on The Simpsons for most of its run, has addressed this directly and more than once. His explanation has not changed. If you throw enough darts, you are going to hit some bullseyes. That is the whole answer as far as he is concerned. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of what fans consider its peak seasons, was similarly plain. There are very few cases where The Simpsons actually predicted something. It is mainly coincidence because the episodes are old and history repeats itself. Organizations that fact-check viral content have looked systematically at many of the most widely circulated prediction claims and found that most of them have straightforward explanations rooted in trends that were already clearly visible at the time the episodes were written. The writers did not predict Trump's presidency. Trump had been publicly discussing the possibility of running for president since the late 1980s. The writers looked at the trajectory of celebrity culture in American politics, at Trump specifically as a figure who had spent years cultivating an image of wealth and tough talk and outsized personality, and wrote a joke about what the logical endpoint of that trajectory might look like. They were extrapolating a trend forward to its absurd conclusion. The trend eventually arrived at the conclusion. The writers did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. Media consolidation was an accelerating and clearly visible trend. The writers imagined a mega-corporation swallowing its competitors and named the most likely candidate for the hypothetical acquiring party. The merger eventually happened. The writers did not predict the smartwatch. Personal technology had been getting smaller and more capable for decades. The writers imagined what a wrist-mounted communication device might eventually look like. The device eventually arrived. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been one of the most formally educated in television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other research institutions. Many have academic backgrounds in mathematics, hard sciences, computer science, and political theory. These are not people guessing randomly about where things are headed. They are highly educated observers of American culture who have spent their professional careers studying trends, identifying patterns, and extrapolating trajectories forward to their logical ends. They are doing something like applied futurism embedded in comedy writing. They read the present with more care and more depth than most, and then they push it forward to see where it goes. Volume matters to the complete picture. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains multiple jokes, satirical observations, and cultural extrapolations about the likely direction of American life. When you generate that much content about the trajectory of American culture over that long a time period, some of it will align with future events through sheer statistical probability. The prediction phenomenon is partly a function of the show's extraordinary volume over an extraordinary span of time. But here is the most important variable, and it is the one that most debunking discussions treat as an afterthought when it is actually the center of the picture: confirmation bias. The Simpsons has also made predictions that did not come true, thousands of them. Jokes about jetpacks becoming common transportation, predictions about moon colonies and flying cars and technological developments that never materialized, political outcomes that went the other way, cultural shifts that never happened, trends that reversed, extrapolations that pointed accurately at a trajectory but that arrived at a destination reality chose not to visit. Nobody shares those. Nobody screenshots a Simpsons gag that predicted something that did not happen. Nobody builds a thread or a video around the many, many instances in which the show's extrapolations about the future were wrong. Confirmation bias operates in one direction. The hits get amplified and circulated and remembered, and the misses disappear completely. When you filter 800 episodes of satirical content about the trajectory of American culture through a confirmation bias mechanism that retains only the accurate predictions and discards all the inaccurate ones, you produce a highlight reel that looks exactly like prophecy. It looks like evidence of special foreknowledge or of some unusual relationship with the future, but it is not. It is the natural consequence of a very large dataset processed through a very selective filter. And yet, the clean debunking runs into trouble at the edges. Some of the coincidences are specific enough that statistical probability and confirmation bias together do not fully account for them. The Trump prediction did not just forecast that a celebrity might run for president. It specified Trump by name. It depicted him descending an escalator in a visual sequence that mirrors with uncomfortable precision the specific theatrical staging of the announcement Trump made in 2015. The Siegfried and Roy prediction did not just make a general joke about the danger of performing with wild animals. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost exactly what happened when Roy Horn was critically injured in 2003. These are not trend extrapolations that happen to line up with a general direction. These are specific details that correspond to specific future events in ways that feel different from the broad strokes of the other predictions. This is where the most genuinely interesting explanation for the prediction phenomenon lies. The one that does not depend on special foreknowledge or supernatural ability, and that is more interesting than either of those would be. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through any form of influence on events directly, through cultural influence, through the way the show has embedded itself into the American imagination over 36 years of continuous operation. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most widely referenced pieces of media in American cultural history. It has been on the air longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations and jokes have become part of the vocabulary through which Americans understand their own culture and their own country. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream and stays there. Millions of people watch it. It becomes a reference point that gets invoked when Trump appears in real political contexts. It makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel culturally familiar before it happens. It primes the imagination. It reduces the psychological distance between the joke and the reality. And when the reality eventually arrives, it does not feel like a surprise or a shock. It feels like recognition. We have been here before. The Simpsons already did this. The show made it feel inevitable before it was actual. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. It made media consolidation feel like the natural endpoint of an obvious trend. And then when the merger happened, the culture's response was not alarm or surprise. It was the specific feeling of watching a prediction land. Of course they did. The Simpsons told us this was coming. The show normalized the future before the future arrived. It did the cultural work of making outcomes feel foreordained. And then when those outcomes materialized, they felt like confirmations rather than surprises. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and the culture stared into it long enough to start resembling the reflection. The nuclear plant, the corrupt billionaire, the incompetent government, the population too distracted to notice how systematically it is being exploited. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to happen repeatedly without accumulating consequence. Springfield is not a warning about where America was heading. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was when the show first aired. The writers just wrote it down before anyone else did. The predictions are not prophecy. They are what happens when a very long-running show produced by very educated and observant writers is filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias mechanism in human history, which is the internet and the human cognitive tendency to remember what confirms existing beliefs and forget what contradicts them. The show wrote enough possible futures that some of them were bound to arrive, and the ones that arrived are the only ones anyone remembers. But try explaining that to yourself the next time a clip from 1,998 lines up with a headline from this week. Even knowing precisely how the mechanism works, even being able to explain it clearly and accurately, it is still something to sit with. 800 episodes, 36 years, thousands of observations about where America was headed, and enough bullseyes to make even the show's own creators pause and wonder. Section: Mona Simpson and the conspiracy that shaped 3 generations. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was the official story. Abe Simpson told Homer that his mother had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned her in the way you mourned someone you never really got to know. He grew up believing he was the kind of son whose mother chose to leave him, or chose to die and leave him, which amounted to the same wound. He internalized that loss as a statement about his worth, and that internalized wound shaped everything about Homer Simpson. His desperate and compulsive need for approval from everyone around him, his terror of being abandoned, his inability to sustain any kind of self-advocacy when push comes to shove, his willingness to endure humiliation from an employer who cannot remember his name after years of working together, rather than risk the stability of the job, rather than risk being alone. His clinginess toward Marge, the specific quality of his love for her that has always had an edge of fear in it, the fear that she might eventually stop, and that without her he would be back in the original condition, the boy whose mother was gone. His compulsive need to be liked by literally everyone he encounters, to be needed, to be acknowledged. Every pattern that makes Homer Homer can be traced back to the same origin point. He was a child who believed his mother chose not to be there, and he understood that as a verdict on his worth that has never fully been overturned. In Season 7, Episode 7, the show revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired the 19th of November, 1995. Homer fakes his own death to get out of working a Saturday cleanup shift at the plant, which is a thoroughly Homer way to handle a scheduling problem. When Marge insists he go correct the official records, Homer discovers that according to the town's municipal documentation, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him, the grave Homer visited at some point in his life to mourn her, belongs to Walt Whitman, the 19th century poet. Abe Simpson had been using a famous writer's headstone as a stand-in for his wife's burial site for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave, not knowing he is still alive. She does not recognize him at first. He has changed entirely in the 27 years since she last saw him. He has become the person he became in her absence, which is not the person he would have been if she had stayed. When he proves who he is, when the recognition finally comes, their reunion is one of the most genuinely affecting scenes the show has produced across all of its seasons. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other in a cemetery beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. The scene earns every emotional beat it asks for, without ever pushing too hard. And then Mona tells him the truth about why she left. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him, or because something about him drove her away. She left because staying would have put him and Abe in danger. Because the man who owned the nuclear power plant, the man Homer would eventually spend his entire adult working life employed by without ever understanding the connection between them, had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was at that point a housewife, married to Abe, mother to young Homer. She was by every outward measure ordinary, living a quiet life in Springfield while the world outside was going through the particular turbulence of that particular moment. And then she was radicalized. The show depicts this transformation with its characteristic lightness, but treats the underlying cause with genuine seriousness. She joined a group of activists, and their target was a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Not the nuclear power plant, a germ warfare facility. Burns was not only operating a nuclear plant with 342 safety violations, he was also running a separate laboratory designed to produce weaponized biological agents in Springfield, the same town where he would later build the nuclear reactor. The same community where children played and families lived, and nobody had any idea that the richest man in town was also manufacturing diseases in a facility within driving distance of their homes. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agents stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard. The security guard happened to be Clancy Wiggum, who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. The weapons were destroyed. But Mona made a mistake that cost her everything. As the group was escaping, someone was knocked down in the confusion. She stopped. She stopped to help the person who had fallen. That person was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, the man who had put those weapons in her community without her knowledge or consent, the man she had just defeated. She helped him up. He saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Homer or Abe without putting them at legal risk. She could not hold her son or sit with him or explain to him what was happening and why she had to go. She kissed him goodbye while he was sleeping and walked out of his life. And Homer woke up and his mother was not there. Abe told him she had died, and Homer spent the next 27 years believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather die than raise. Now, here is where the conspiracy takes its full shape. Burns did not just report Mona to the FBI and move on. He held the grudge. He pursued her actively across decades, using the resources and the connections that come with being a billionaire who has been accumulating power and influence for over a century. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her through a cab window almost immediately. He recognizes her. He calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time in his life. This time he knows why she left. He knows who made her leave. He knows that the man responsible for his mother's absence is his employer. He knows that the billionaire who signs his paychecks is the billionaire who took his childhood from him. And Homer does not connect the dots in any actionable way. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not sustain an awareness of the connection between the man upstairs and the hole that has been in his life since he was 6 years old. This is not played as comedy. It is played as something sadder than comedy, because Homer is not capable of making and holding that connection. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of living in Springfield's compromised environment, Homer is too damaged to follow the thread of his own suffering back to the person who pulled it. He can understand individual facts when they are placed in front of him. He cannot maintain the larger picture of how those facts connect. That capacity was taken from him too early and too thoroughly. That is the conspiracy. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a small child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up with a specific emotional wound in a specific location, a wound that would make him desperate for approval, terrified of abandonment, incapable of challenging authority in any sustained way, unwilling to risk the stability of even a bad situation because the alternative to the bad situation is being alone again. The perfect employee. A man who will work at a dangerous and contaminated facility for decades without ever meaningfully pushing back, because the alternative to the job is not just unemployment. The alternative is the condition he has been trying to escape since he was 6 years old. Homer does not work at the power plant because he is too dim to find something better. Homer works at the power plant because Burns broke him at a formative age, and the broken version of Homer is precisely what Burns's plant requires. Compliant, obedient, incapable of sustained resistance, pathetically grateful for any scrap of acknowledgement from the man who employs him. A later episode adds a second layer to the conspiracy. Burns committed a crime, and Abe Simpson discovered it. The two men made a deal. Abe's silence in exchange for Burns's guarantee that Homer would always have a job at the plant, regardless of competence, regardless of the number of mistakes he made. 742 documented errors on Homer's record, and he was never permanently let go, because the contract Abe and Burns made long ago protected him. Homer's job security was not a cartoon convenience or a narrative shorthand. It was a contractual obligation between his father and his mother's persecutor, brokered in secret and never explained to Homer because explaining the contract would require explaining everything. 3 generations. Abe made a deal with the enemy and buried the truth to protect his son, and in the process made his son's exploitation permanent. Mona fought against the system and lost everything for it. Homer inherited all of the consequences and never understood why his life felt like something essential had been taken from it before he ever arrived. The show proved what Homer might have been in the episode where the crayon is removed. Without the suppression, Homer is articulate and capable and clear-eyed. He can see his situation. He can think about what he sees. He becomes the person the radiation and the crayon and the grief of a motherless childhood have been preventing him from being, and it makes him deeply and sustainedly unhappy. Because you can understand your situation without being able to change it. Understanding is not the same as freedom. So he chooses the crayon back. He chooses not to understand. He chooses the fog over the clarity because the clarity hurts more. But that choice was never free. Burns made sure of that when Homer was 6 years old, and the person who would have taught him to see was sent away in the middle of the night. Mona died in a later season. Homer sits with her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew leave for the last time. The show does not cut away from it. No joke to break the weight. Just a man and his mother, and the full compressed weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them at once. Burns won. Burns always wins in Springfield. Because in Springfield, the man with the most money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the plant until he cannot anymore. Because his grandfather made a deal, because his mother made a choice, because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 9. Where is Springfield? Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people know Springfield than can name the capital of many real American states. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for years, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, and a convenience store that sells sandwiches that may or may not be safe to eat. It has mountains and oceans and deserts and farmland. It has weather that ranges from full blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within a single season. It borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending entirely on which episode you happen to be watching on a given evening. Springfield does not exist in any one state because it exists in all of them simultaneously, and the show has been deliberately constructing this impossibility for its entire run. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow down where Springfield actually is, another clue surfaces in a different episode that eliminates the apparent narrowing. The pattern has been consistent across 36 years of episodes. Lisa's area code starts with 636, which is a Missouri area code. The abbreviation used for Springfield State has been shown at various points as NT, which is not a real state abbreviation. When Homer calls the state capital in one episode, the voice on the other end of the line identifies the state as one that begins with a vowel, which is true of many states and eliminates almost nothing. Multiple episodes place Springfield clearly in the northern part of the country. Multiple other episodes place it equally clearly in the southern part. One episode puts it on the coast. Another places it in the deep interior. The show has been doing this consistently and without apparent accident for 3.5 decades. Matt Groening, the show's creator, named Springfield after Springfield, Oregon. He said this plainly in a 2012 interview with the Smithsonian Institution's magazine. He grew up in Oregon and had a personal connection to the name. He also chose it because Springfield is one of the most common city names in the United States, and he wanted the town to feel like it could be anywhere and belong to everyone. For approximately 48 hours after that interview was published, the mystery appeared to be solved. Springfield was in Oregon. The question had an answer, and then the show continued contradicting it. Episodes that aired after the Smithsonian interview place Springfield in geographic contexts that are fundamentally incompatible with Oregon. The writers did not honor Groening's admission. The mystery was maintained. This was not accidental. The geographic ambiguity of Springfield is a maintained creative decision, not an oversight or a symptom of careless continuity management. The surface-level explanation for why the show does this is the one Groening has articulated and the writers have reinforced. Springfield is designed to be universal, to resonate with viewers regardless of where they actually grew up and where they actually live, to be recognizable to someone from a Rust Belt industrial city, and to someone from a small New England town, and to someone from the suburban South, and to someone from the flat middle of the country. Springfield is assembled from elements of every American community that has ever existed, overlapping and layering without geographic logic, producing a place that is simultaneously familiar to almost everyone and specific to no one. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. This explanation is real and it is accurate, and Groening has confirmed it as the intentional design philosophy. But the theories we have been working through tonight give the geographic impossibility additional dimensions worth sitting with. If the radiation theory is correct, if Springfield is a contamination zone where the laws of biology have been altered by decades of nuclear exposure, there is a question worth asking about why the laws of geography should be exempt from the same disruption. The people inside Springfield have 4 fingers and yellow skin and can survive injuries that would kill a normal human being reliably and repeatedly. If the contamination can do that to the biology of living organisms, why should the physical landscape of the town obey normal geographic constraints? Maybe Springfield has mountains and ocean within close proximity to each other because whatever is leaking from those towers does not only alter biology. Maybe it alters the physical space of the town itself. Maybe the radiation has compressed geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible territory where the normal rules of distance and terrain do not apply. Springfield's geographic impossibility is a direct extension of the contamination's effects on the local reality, not just on the local organisms, but on the local space. If the coma theory is correct, Springfield's geographic impossibility is exactly what you would expect from a dreaming mind assembling a location from fragments, rather than from precise remembered reality. Homer does not have a photographic map of the United States stored in his unconscious. He has impressions. He has emotional memories of places rather than accurate spatial records of them. Mountains from a vacation trip he half remembers. An ocean shoreline from a commercial he absorbed while only half watching television. A desert from a film he fell asleep watching on a Saturday afternoon. Farmland from driving through somewhere flat and green that he cannot specifically place. His dreaming brain gathered all of those fragments and assembled them into the territory it needed for the dream to run, without any concern for geographic logic, because dreams operate by emotional logic rather than cartographic logic. Springfield feels like America because it is built from Homer's fragmentary, incomplete, longing-held memory of America. It is every place he has ever been or imagined or half-glimpsed, layered into one impossible landscape that contains everything he associates with the country he loves. If the collective denial framework is correct, the geographic ambiguity serves a specific and practical function that goes beyond aesthetics or universal relatability. You cannot conduct a federal investigation of a nuclear facility in a jurisdiction that does not have a clearly established location. You cannot bring regulatory action against a contaminating plant if the state it operates in keeps changing depending on which documentary source you consult. You cannot hold an institution accountable for what it has done to a specific community if the community's geographic and legal identity shifts every time someone tries to pin it down. Springfield floats between states not only because the writers want it to belong to everyone, but because floating is the condition from which it is hardest to be held accountable for anything. Landing means accountability. Landing means an established jurisdiction with established regulatory authority and established legal standing to ask questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who glows in the dark every Thursday evening. The episode Behind the Laughter, the season 12 mockumentary that presented the Simpson family as real people being profiled in a documentary format, finally gave Springfield a definitive location. In the original broadcast of that episode, the family was identified as being from northern Kentucky. In the syndicated version that circulated in reruns after the episode's initial airing, the location was changed to a different state entirely. The definitive answer given by the show itself depends entirely on which version of the episode you are able to access and when you accessed it. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth depending on when and how you looked for it. Even when Springfield has a fixed location, the fixed location does not stay fixed. It shifts. It refuses to stay pinned down. It declines to be made accountable to any single fixed point on a map. Every state in the Union has been proposed at some point by someone with a coherent argument for it. Every proposed location has supporting evidence and contradicting evidence in roughly equal measure, because the show has ensured that the evidence exists on both sides for every viable candidate. The permanent ambiguity has been actively maintained across 36 years and shows no sign of resolving. Springfield will never be definitively located, not because the show cannot decide, but because the show decided a long time ago that Springfield is more valuable as an unfindable mystery than as an identifiable place on a real map. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone who watches the show. A town that belongs to everyone is a town that cannot be shut down by anyone. You cannot draw a regulatory boundary around Springfield that holds. You cannot make it answer for what it has done to its people if nobody can establish which state those people are legally residents of. Springfield does not have a location. It has the shape of a location. It has the feeling of a place. But every time you reach toward the specific fact of where it is, the fact slips sideways and becomes something else. That is not an accident. In Springfield, nothing that protects the status quo is ever an accident. Section 10. The floating timeline and what it actually means. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8. She is still 8. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. They still are. Maggie was 1 year old and could not yet walk reliably or speak. She still cannot walk reliably and has chosen not to speak. 36 years have passed in the actual world you and I live in. 0 years have passed in Springfield. Not one. Not a single additional birthday for any named character. Not a gray hair on any Simpson head. Not a wrinkle. Not a moment of the ordinary physical evidence that accumulates in human bodies as time passes. The industry term for this structural feature of the show is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always synchronized with the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are understood to be living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were understood to be living in 1995. The year advances, the technology changes, the cultural references update to reflect whatever the current moment contains, but the characters themselves remain frozen at whatever age they were when the show began. It is the standard approach for long-running animated programs. Most viewers accept it as a natural condition of the medium and move on without much examination. But The Simpsons has been running long enough, across enough cultural changes and enough decades, that the floating timeline has created contradictions of a size and a strangeness that have started to crack the show's own internal reality in ways that are worth looking at carefully. The most obvious of these involves the backstory of Homer and Marge's relationship. When the show began, their shared history was anchored in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. Their courtship was set during a specific cultural moment, complete with music and clothing and cultural touchstones that belonged to that era. The whole thing tracked correctly for two people who would be in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. Homer's hair in flashback episodes, Marge's prom dress, the specific textures of their young adulthood, all of it was calibrated to a time period that made logical sense given their apparent ages when the show first aired. But as the floating timeline dragged the show's present forward through the 1990s and into the 2000s and beyond, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they cannot have met in 1980. They would have to have met around 2005. Their high school experience would not have been defined by Watergate and disco. It would have been defined by Facebook and early smartphones. The show has depicted this shift explicitly across multiple flashback episodes. Homer and Marge's youth has been rewritten in successive iterations to place their formative years in the 1990s, then the 2000s, then the 2010s. Their origin story has been told at least 4 different times in 4 different decades. The characters are the same across all 4 versions. The love story is the same. But the era in which they lived keeps sliding forward because the arithmetic of the floating timeline demands it. Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. They have a draft of a past that gets revised every few years to maintain the illusion of a coherent present. Now apply the theories we have been discussing all night. Every single one of them converges on this point. Every theory arrives at the same conclusion through a different path, and all the paths lead to the same place. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since April 1993. His dreaming brain cannot generate a future it never witnessed. It has only the last image it held of each person. It loops back to that image. It holds it there. Everyone in Homer's dream stays exactly as they were at the moment the vending machine fell, because that is the last data point the dreamer's brain has to work from. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the contamination has disrupted the biological mechanisms through which normal cellular aging operates. The same process that gave Homer his extraordinary physical resilience and Maggie her extraordinary cognitive range has interfered with the normal passage of time through living tissue. The characters are not choosing to stay young. They cannot age because what was done to their biology by the plant and the water and the air they have been living in has altered their relationship with time at the cellular level. The collective denial theory that the principal and the pauper makes explicit says nobody ages because Springfield has collectively agreed not to acknowledge the passage of time, the same way it has agreed not to acknowledge the three-eyed fish, the fake principal, the dome, and everything else that would require the town to change in response to what it knows. Springfield agrees not to know that time has passed. The agreement is maintained through the same social contract that maintains every other piece of the town's chosen fiction. Acknowledging that Bart is now older than 10 would require acknowledging the passage of the years during which he aged. Acknowledging the passage of those years would require acknowledging everything that happened in them. Everything that happened is not something Springfield is willing to acknowledge. So, Bart stays 10. The Burns immortality theory adds one more layer. Aging itself is already a negotiable condition within Springfield's reality. At least one person in the town has found a way to effectively negate it through the application of sufficient wealth and technology and determination. If aging is negotiable for Burns, the concept of aging is already unstable within Springfield's physical and biological logic. The show has established that the mechanisms underlying aging can be interfered with. The residents' non-aging fits into a universe where that interference is a demonstrated possibility. All four theories are saying the same thing in different vocabularies. Time does not work in Springfield the way it works anywhere else. Not because it is an animated show with episodic structure, though it is that. Because something about Springfield specifically, whether it is radiation or a coma or collective agreement or a combination of all three, has broken the normal flow of time for every person and creature and institution inside it. The floating timeline is not a production convenience the show adopted reluctantly because the alternative was too complicated. It is a symptom. It is the show communicating that these characters are locked, held in a loop, cycling through variations of the same lives without ever reaching the conclusion that time normally delivers to living things. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this more than once. In the Season 6 episode, Lisa's Wedding, the show flashes forward to a future in which Lisa is 23 years old and engaged to be married. The flash forward is detailed and specific and emotionally textured. Lisa has grown into exactly the person the earlier episodes suggested she would become. Intelligent, principled, searching for connection in a world that remains somewhat indifferent to what she offers it. The episode is genuinely moving. It proves beyond any doubt that the writers can imagine these characters as adults. They can see who these people would become if they were allowed to grow. But the flash forward is a single episode, a glimpse. A window that opens for 22 minutes and then closes. Lisa returns to being 8. Bart returns to being 10. The future is locked back in the vault. The permanent present resumes as if the glimpse never occurred. The show can imagine its characters aging. It chooses not to allow it. That choice is not made because of production constraints or narrative limitations. It is made because letting the characters age would change what the show is. It would mean the family changes. It would mean the children grow up and leave. It would mean Homer and Marge in an empty house on Evergreen Terrace in their late 60s. It would mean the show stops being a comedy about a family and starts being something about loss and time and the specific grief of watching your children become people who do not need you in the same way anymore. And that is a show that most of the audience does not want to watch. Because here is the thing the floating timeline is actually doing. It is not primarily about The Simpsons. It is about us. The Simpsons is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. The show has said this explicitly, and the culture has accepted it, and the claim has become true through sheer duration. And the American family, as the show has built it, and as the culture has come to need it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must stay middle-aged. Marge must stay patient and holding things together. Bart must stay rebellious in 10. Lisa must stay idealistic in 8. Maggie must stay at the threshold of becoming. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart turns 11, and the show acknowledges what that means, the show stops being the thing it is and becomes something else. An elegy. The story of a family that ran out of time. And the culture that has been watching this family for 36 years does not want that story. America wants the version where the kids are always young, where the house always looks the same, where Homer always comes through the front door at the end of the day and the family is always there. The floating timeline is not a production decision. It is a thesis statement about what the audience needs from this show and what the show has decided to provide. The loop is not the Simpson family's prison. It is ours. We built it. We maintain it every time we tune in. We tighten it every time we share a clip from an episode that aired before most of us were born. We make it a little harder for the show to end every time we treat it as a permanent fixture of the cultural landscape. Because if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and the show has to honor the arithmetic of what that means, something breaks that we were not prepared for. Something ends. An ending means admitting that 36 years have passed. that we are older, that the couch we sat on as children watching the opening credits exists somewhere else now, or not at all. That time kept moving through us, even though it did not move through Springfield. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps running, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through that front door, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down, we can let something play in the background, and we can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never has to end. The Simpsons do not age because aging means ending, and the American family is not allowed to end. Not in television, and not in the imagination, and not in the dream of a man lying in a hospital bed in a town that does not appear on any real map. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We pressed pause in 1989, and we have not pressed play. And here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house on the same impossible street in the same impossible town, waiting for something to change, knowing that nothing will, because we will not let it. Section 11. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the final shape of Springfield. 2 more mysteries before we close, and the first one has been hiding in plain sight for 36 years. Hans Moleman. If you have spent any time watching The Simpsons across its run, you know who Hans Moleman is. He is the tiny, elderly, essentially blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and whose role in the show, to the extent that he has a role, is to suffer terrible things and often to die. He gets hit by cars with a frequency that would suggest Springfield has a serious traffic problem, specifically in whatever area he is walking through. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by various animals. He gets struck by lightning on what seems like a suspiciously regular basis. He gets incinerated. He walks into traffic and is not seen again. He falls into open pits and off of elevated surfaces and into the mouths of things. He is, by any honest counting of canonical, regular continuity, non-special episode deaths, the most frequently killed recurring character in the history of American animated television. And then he shows up in the background of the next episode completely fine. No explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement that he was dead recently. He is just there again, in the background of some unrelated scene, doing whatever unremarkable thing the background requires someone to do in that moment, alive, and apparently unbothered, and ready to experience another death in due course. Most people who are fans of the show treat this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. The show has never addressed it, and never will because there is nothing to address. It is just one of those things the show does for comedy. But Moleman once stated his age as 31. He said it on camera, in a direct response to a direct question about how old he was, without apparent irony, without any contextual indication that he was joking or exaggerating. 31 years old? Look at Hans Moleman. He is stooped. He is tiny in a way that suggests not just short stature, but a compression of the spine that comes with advanced age. His eyesight is so poor that he navigates primarily by feel and by the shapes of things, rather than by clear visual information. His skin has the specific quality of very advanced age, the papery thinness, and the particular quality of having been in use for a very long time. He moves with the careful, slightly laborious economy of someone managing a body that has accumulated a significant amount of mileage and is conserving what it has left. He appears, by every visible measure, to be somewhere in his 80s or 90s at the absolute earliest and possibly older. If he is telling the truth about his age, and the show does not provide any indication that he is not, then something happened to Hans Moleman that aged him catastrophically and decades ahead of schedule. Something took a man in his early 30s, in the opening years of what should have been a long and productive middle age, and compressed decades of biological aging into a period of time that should have produced none of it. And that same something also made him effectively unkillable through what appears to be biological reconstitution, meaning that the mechanism responsible for destroying his normal aging timeline also gave his body an extraordinary ability to rebuild itself after fatal damage. Under the radiation theory, Moleman is the most extreme visible mutation in Springfield. He is what happens when the contamination's effects on biological aging operate at maximum intensity rather than at the moderate levels that produce the four-fingered, yellow-skinned baseline Springfield resident. Whatever the plant's runoff has done to everyone else in town, It is done to Mulman in a more concentrated or more sustained or differently expressed way that accelerated his aging to the point of turning his early 30s into what looks like his late 80s, while simultaneously giving his cellular regeneration such extreme capacity that he can reconstitute himself after dying entirely. He does not recover from injuries the way Homer does. Homer absorbs damage and heals. Mulman actually dies in canonical continuity and comes back because his cellular structure has been altered in ways that make death a temporary state rather than a permanent one. Under the coma theory, Mulman is a background process in Homer's dream. Homer maintains the main cast, the people he loves, and the people who matter to him, with a high degree of consistency across the dream's episodes because they are the people the dream exists to preserve. But minor characters, the people who populate the dream's environment without being central to it, are maintained with less care and less consistency. Mulman dies because Homer's dreaming brain periodically lets the background processes lapse. The memory of Mulman that Homer's brain is running does not have enough importance to keep it continuously active. It lapses, and the character that lapses is dead. Then Homer's dream needs a certain number of bodies to populate the next scene, and it reassembles Mulman because he is available, and he is the kind of minor character that environments like Springfield require. He is furniture that the dreaming mind breaks occasionally, and then reconstructs because the simulation has a minimum staffing requirement. Under the collective denial framework, Mulman's death cycle is simply another item in the long list of things Springfield has agreed not to notice or question. A man dies in public, repeatedly and visibly, in front of witnesses, and nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. Nobody finds the pattern alarming. Springfield has normalized Mulman's situation the way it has normalized everything else in its environment that should produce sustained concern and sustained inquiry. The three-eyed fish, the billionaire who emits visible radiation after his Thursday treatment, the baby who shot a man, the principal who was a fraud for 20 years, and a tiny, near-blind old man who is 31 years old and who dies every few weeks and keeps showing up as if nothing happened. The fact that Hans Mulman cannot be fully explained by any single theory is itself a kind of evidence about Springfield. He is the show's clearest demonstration that something is happening inside this town that exceeds what any single explanatory framework can fully account for. Every theory we have discussed tonight hits its limit somewhere. Mulman is where all of them hit their limits simultaneously. He is Springfield's remainder, the thing that cannot be divided evenly into any of the available categories, the evidence that remains unexplained after all the explanations have done their best work. He is the part of Springfield that just stares back at you from the background of the frame. And then there is Ned Flanders. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not, constructed and presented that way deliberately and with care across 36 years of episodes. He is kind where Homer is selfish. He is patient where Homer is impulsive. He is physically healthy where Homer is a medical marvel of resilience over good habits. He is financially responsible where Homer is a barely managed disaster. He is a present and engaged father where Homer's parenting often creates the problems his children have to overcome. He is devoutly religious in a way that appears genuine rather than performative. He is generous to people who have done nothing to earn his generosity, including specifically Homer, who has done quite a lot over the years to actively damage Ned's life. And the show punishes Ned for all of it, consistently, across 36 years, without meaningful interruption. Ned's wife Maude was killed at the Springfield Speedway. The mechanism of her death was a misfired t-shirt cannon. The cannon was not aimed at Maude. It was aimed at Homer, who dodged it because Homer does not like being hit by t-shirts. Homer's reflexive self-protection redirected the projectiles in the direction that killed Ned's wife. Homer's inability to accept a minor physical discomfort on behalf of someone else in his immediate vicinity produced, as its direct consequence, the death of the person who mattered most to Ned in the world. And Ned forgave him. He extended to Homer the grace and the patience that his faith and his conditioning require him to extend. He forgave the man who killed his wife through selfishness and moved on and continued to be a good neighbor and continued to be kind and continued to be the person his conditioning taught him to be. The show revealed the conditioning in an episode built around a hurricane destroying Ned's house and the community's subsequent attempt to rebuild it. The rebuilding was done with such casual incompetence that the finished house collapsed almost immediately. Ned broke. He had a genuine and complete psychological breakdown, screaming at the assembled community, issuing a specific and detailed accounting of every grievance he had been suppressing behind the performance of niceness for years. He named names. He said things that had clearly been compressed under enormous pressure for a very long time, and then he was committed to a mental health facility. While he was there, the show revealed that Ned's relentless niceness is not an organic character trait. It is not a natural quality that emerged from a good nature and a genuine faith. It is the product of childhood behavioral modification that was performed on Ned before he was old enough to understand or consent to what was happening to him. Ned was a violent and uncontrollable child. His parents, operating from a belief system that opposed discipline as a concept, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years using behavioral conditioning techniques to suppress the rage and replace it with compliance. Ned's kindness is a cage that was built around a feral child by a doctor who conditioned the anger out of him through intensive professional intervention. His patience with Homer is not saintly choice. It is a programmed response. He cannot reliably express anger because his brain was wired, at an age too young to resist it, to suppress anger at all costs. The suppression is not something he chooses, it is something that happens to him. Once you understand this, every aspect of Ned's life reads differently. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the conditioned response of a man whose nervous system was trained in childhood to produce forgiveness as its default output, regardless of the input that provoked it. It is a reflex rather than a moral achievement. His faith is not primarily spiritual conviction, though there is real belief within it. It is a framework, an external structure that provides meaning for a man who needs something outside himself to explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. God has a plan, the structure says. The suffering is meaningful even when you cannot see how. Ned holds on to that framework with a specific intensity that makes sense when you understand what he is using it to manage. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the only response the conditioning allows. He literally cannot sustain the alternative. The show knows all of this. It has shown you what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned broke in the hurricane episode, the person who emerged from beneath the conditioning was not frightening in the way you might expect. He did not become violent, though there was something in the performance of that episode that hinted at the underlying capacity. The frightening thing was not the anger, it was the despair. The pure, bottomless, completely unadorned quality of the despair underneath. Ned has been performing goodness for so many years, performing it at such high personal cost, that when the performance cracks, what you see is the full accumulated weight of everything the performance has been used to suppress. Every unreturned kindness, every undeserved punishment absorbed without acknowledgement, every moment of grace extended to people who never once reciprocated or appreciated what receiving that grace cost. All of it compressed by decades of conditioning and released at once, and it looks like something that has been waiting a very long time to be expressed. The theological dimension is the darkest part, and the show earns it because the theology is established as canonical fact within the show's own universe. God talks to Homer. This is established canon. Multiple canonical episodes. Face-to-face conversations. God has appeared to Homer directly, in the show's own reality, not as a dream or a metaphor or a vision that could be dismissed as imagination. God has spoken to Homer with warmth and with humor, and with the specific ease of someone who has this relationship with Homer and finds it comfortable and natural. God gave Homer guidance. God made jokes at Homer's expense with the tone of genuine affection. God has acknowledged Homer, personally and directly, in multiple canonical scenes across the show's run. God has never once directly addressed Ned Flanders. In 36 seasons of canonical episodes, in a show whose universe contains a God who talks to Homer Simpson with evident fondness, Ned Flanders has gone to church every week and prayed with apparent sincerity and organized his entire life around his faith and structured every meaningful decision around what his belief system asks of him, and God has not spoken directly to him once, not once. The drunk who falls asleep in church gets divine conversation. The man who goes to church every single week because he genuinely believes and genuinely wants to live according to that belief gets silence. That is not an accident. That is not a continuity oversight. That is the show making a deliberate and considered statement about the nature of the system inside which these characters exist. Goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Kindness is not protected. Faith is not answered. The system, in all its various forms, whether the radiation or Burns's empire, or the collective denial, or whatever structural property of Springfield, none of the theories have fully accounted for, does not care about moral behavior. It cares about compliance. And Ned is the most compliant person in the town. He was made compliant before he was old enough to understand what was being done to him. And his reward for a lifetime of compliance and good behavior is a dead wife. A house that was rebuilt by his community and immediately fell down. A neighbor who has cost him more than anyone else he has ever known, and a God who will talk to Homer in the kitchen but has not spoken directly to the most faithful person in town in 36 years of episodes. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that is not designed to reward rightness. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that is not designed to punish wrongness. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. They will keep living next door to each other. And the gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and the man who does not, has never closed. Because in Springfield, it is not designed to close. The system keeps Homer at the plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman in the ground, and the principal as the imposter, and the fish with 3 eyes, and the population cognitively suppressed just enough to keep them from asking why, everyone exactly where they are. In the loop, forever. That is Springfield. That is what 36 seasons of mysteries and theories and contradictions and impossibilities reduces to when you trace all of them back to their common foundation. A town where the rules are arranged to maintain the existing arrangement. A town where honesty is illegal and forgetting is mandatory, and the gap between those who benefit from the system and those who live inside it is never allowed to close because the system is specifically designed to prevent that from happening. A town where nothing changes because nothing is allowed to change, and nothing is allowed to change because change would require someone accounting for what has been done. And a family sitting on a couch in the middle of it, watching television, surviving everything, forgetting everything, loving each other with an imperfect and total and indestructible love that has never once stopped being the most real thing the show contains. Section 12. Bart Simpson and the Weight of Being 10 Forever. Bart Simpson has been 10 years old for 36 years. He has been in 4th grade for 36 years. He has been in trouble for 36 years. He has been pulling pranks and paging Mo Sislak and riding his skateboard down the street past the same houses in the same order and arriving home to the same dinner table for 36 years. In a show full of frozen characters living frozen lives in a town that cannot change, Bart may be the most frozen of all. Because Homer and Marge at least have the story of their marriage to orbit around. Lisa has the arc of her intelligence and the ongoing struggle to find a place that can hold it. Maggie has her mystery. Bart has the prank and the skateboard and the chalkboard at the beginning of every episode, writing the same punishment sentence over and over, a new sentence each time, but the same punishment every time, the same lesson that never takes. He has been 10 years old long enough that the show has started to develop a quiet anxiety about what that means. The flash-forward episodes are the evidence. Every time The Simpsons imagines its characters in the future, every time the show opens a window into what these people might become, the version of Bart that emerges is troubled. He is usually divorced, usually struggling, usually somewhere between where he hoped to be and where he ended up. Lisa's Wedding in Season 6 shows a future Bart who dropped out of college and is working as a demolitions expert. Bart to the Future in Season 11, the episode that also named Trump as Lisa's presidential predecessor, shows future Bart as a failing musician drifting through a life he cannot quite organize. In the same episode, he describes his life as not having gone the way he had hoped. He describes this to his sister at her presidential inauguration. She is the most powerful person in the country. He is sleeping on her couch. The pattern in every imagined future is the same. Lisa thrives. Bart struggles. The intelligence and principle that makes Lisa difficult in Springfield makes her formidable in the wider world. The rebellion and the irreverence and the refusal of authority that makes Bart a folk hero at Springfield Elementary does not translate cleanly into adult life. The skills that made him exceptional at 10 do not compound into anything at 35. This is one of the things the floating timeline is most carefully protecting Bart from having to know. Because the coma theory, if you follow it all the way to its emotional core, is most devastating when you apply it to Bart specifically. If Homer is dreaming, then Homer's unconscious mind is producing the version of Bart that Homer can bear to look at. Not adult Bart, drifting and disconnected and sleeping on his sister's couch. Bart at 10, mischievous and loud and wholly there, charging through the house and driving Homer insane, and requiring Homer's engagement in a way that adult children do not. Homer's dream needs Bart to stay 10, because a 10-year-old Bart still needs his father in a way that a 35-year-old Bart does not. As long as Bart is 10, Homer still has a role. As long as Homer has a role, the dream has a reason to continue. The episode Bart Sells His Soul, Season 7, is the closest the show has come to taking Bart's inner life seriously as something with weight and consequence. Bart sells his soul to Milhouse for $5 as part of a prank designed to prove that souls are not real and that the concept is silly. The episode then systematically demonstrates that something has changed. Bart cannot connect with anything. Music does not move him. He cannot get animals to respond to him the way animals have always responded to him. He does not laugh at things he would normally find funny. He tries to dream about something and cannot. The episode does not argue for the literal existence of a soul as a theological object. It argues for the existence of something intangible but real that makes Bart himself, and it tracks what happens to him when that thing is missing. Bart gets his soul back at the end of the episode. Lisa helps him retrieve it. And then the show resets, and Bart is back to being the irreverent, impervious 10-year-old who is not visibly affected by existential questions about the nature of his own selfhood. But the episode happened. It is in the canon. The show established that Bart Simpson has a soul, that the soul can be absent, and that its absence changes him in ways that are measurable and real. And then the show put the soul back and sealed the door and moved on. The chalkboard is the gag that contains everything. At the beginning of every episode, Bart is shown writing a different punishment sentence on the school chalkboard. I will not eat my notebook paper. I will not call people by their last names. I will not torment the emotionally frail. They change every week. The lesson never takes. Bart is always back at the chalkboard the following week, writing a new punishment for a new infraction that is different in its specifics and identical in its structure to every infraction before it. This is not character development, it is something else. It is a portrait of what happens when someone is prevented from growing by forces outside their control. Bart is not failing to learn. Bart is being held in place. The loop that holds him is not malice. It is love. Or something that functions like love. Homer's love, if the coma theory is correct. The show's love. If the floating timeline is the cultural artifact the floating timeline section argued it is. The audience's love, which requires Bart to remain the 10-year-old troublemaker forever, because that is the Bart we know, and the Bart we need, and the Bart we are not ready to watch becomes something more complicated and less certain. Bart writes his punishment on the chalkboard, and the punishment never takes, and the show continues, and Bart is 10 years old, and the world resets, and Bart is 10 years old, and the world resets again. He is the most punished character in the show, the one who is continuously told that his behavior requires correction, and he is also the one for whom no correction is ever allowed to stick. Because sticking would mean growth. Growth would mean time passing. Time passing would mean Bart becoming someone who is not the Bart we pressed pause on in 1989. He is 10 years old. He will always be 10 years old. The chalkboard will always be waiting for him. And the sentence will always be different, and the lesson will always be the same, and the world will always reset, and Bart will always be there, unchanged, eternal, frozen in the perfect mischief of being 10, because that is what we decided we needed, and that is what the show decided to provide. Whether that is a kindness or a cruelty is a question the show has carefully avoided answering for 36 years. Section 13. Lisa Simpson and the Town That Punishes Knowing. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. She plays the saxophone. She reads at a high school level. She is a Buddhist and a vegetarian and an environmentalist and a feminist and a civil rights advocate and a skeptic and a scholar and the most consistently principled person in Springfield. She has been all of these things since 1989. She is 8 years old. and she has been carrying all of this for 36 years with the specific tiredness of someone who cannot stop seeing what she sees, even when seeing it is exhausting and costly and produces almost no practical reward. The standard reading of Lisa is that she is the show's moral compass, the character who articulates the values the show itself endorses. The person in the room who is not fooled, who sees through the comfortable delusions, who holds the line on what is actually true and what is actually right when everyone else is taking the path of least resistance. That reading is not wrong, but it is incomplete because it does not account for what it costs her. Lisa is punished constantly, not in the explicit, structured way that Bart is punished, with the chalkboard and the detention and the visible consequence. Lisa is punished subtly and persistently, and in ways the show presents as natural conditions of her environment rather than as injustices worth examining. She is isolated in Springfield Elementary, in the town of Springfield, in her own family. Lisa Simpson is profoundly alone in a way that the show treats as an inevitable consequence of being who she is, rather than as a specific failure of the people and institutions around her. The Springfield Elementary environment is the most direct demonstration. The school is structured through underfunding and poor management and the specific indifference of Principal Skinner to anything that falls outside the minimum required function to provide the average child with a minimum adequate education. Lisa is not an average child. Springfield Elementary has nothing to offer her that she has not already surpassed. She sits in classes that cannot challenge her. She interacts with teachers who are not equipped to engage with her. She finds no intellectual peers among the other students because the school system has not created the conditions in which such peers might be identified or nurtured. Lisa's intelligence, which should be the thing that the school's resources are specifically directed toward developing, is instead the thing that most consistently marks her as different in ways that produce social penalty rather than social reward. She has tried to find peers. The show has depicted this across multiple episodes. When Lisa discovers another child who might be intellectually comparable, the show consistently uses that discovery to examine what Lisa needs and then removes it. The gifted student who becomes her friend for an episode, the teacher who engages with her seriously for an episode before leaving, the adult mentor who recognizes what she is before the episode ends and the recognition goes away. Each of these relationships follows the same arc: establishment, brief, genuine connection, and then departure. The connection always goes. The return to isolation is always the baseline. The town of Springfield is not better than the school. Springfield is organized around a set of values that are almost entirely orthogonal to what Lisa values. The town prizes conformity, comfort, the maintenance of familiar patterns, the avoidance of difficult truths. Lisa prizes truth, growth, accountability, the willingness to change when change is warranted. These are not compatible orientations, and Springfield makes this incompatibility clear across every episode in which Lisa tries to engage with it on her own terms. She writes a report about the environmental impact of the tire fire, and nobody reads it. She organizes a campaign for something, and the town responds with temporary interest that evaporates when the next distraction arrives. She advocates for accountability, and the town finds ways to frame her advocacy as the problem. The show does not present Springfield as malicious in its treatment of Lisa. It presents the town as simply too comfortable in its patterns to accommodate the specific challenge she represents. Even her family, which genuinely loves her, cannot fully meet her. Homer loves Lisa completely and without reservation, and across 36 seasons of episodes has demonstrated that love through consistent emotional presence and occasional surprising depths of understanding. But Homer cannot engage with Lisa intellectually. He cannot follow her thinking. He cannot be the intellectual companion she needs. He can hug her and protect her and tell her he loves her and that is real and it matters. It is also not enough. Marge loves Lisa and worries about her and wants her to be happy, and has in various episodes tried to help Lisa navigate the gap between who she is and what the world around her seems to be able to accommodate. But Marge is fundamentally oriented towards social harmony in a way that sometimes means encouraging Lisa to be less rather than more, to make herself smaller so the friction decreases, which is not what Lisa needs. Bart genuinely respects Lisa, which is one of the show's more carefully sustained truths, but their relationship is defined by the gap between them, by what he cannot give her, by what she is that he is not. And Maggie watches everything and says nothing. Lisa's saxophone is the most important object in the show, and almost nobody talks about it as such. Lisa plays the saxophone because music is the one domain in which she can be everything she is without generating the friction that her intelligence and her advocacy generate everywhere else. The saxophone requires her full intelligence to play well. It requires sustained discipline and sustained learning, and the willingness to fail and try again at a level of rigor that the other aspects of her life rarely provide. It gives her a language for what she feels that does not require the people around her to understand it. When Lisa plays, she is not explaining herself. She is not advocating. She is not waiting for the town to catch up to her. She is just expressing what she actually is, through a medium that does not require anyone else's comprehension to be real. The saxophone is also the one thing in Lisa's life that Springfield cannot take from her, and cannot evaluate, and cannot decide is too much. The town can ignore her writing. The school can fail to challenge her intellect. The family can love her without fully understanding her. But nobody can take the music. It is hers in a way that nothing else in her life is unconditionally hers. There is a fan theory about Lisa's future that the show has never explicitly confirmed or denied. The theory holds that Lisa eventually leaves Springfield, that she grows up and leaves and does not come back except to visit, that the broader world, which is not Springfield, is better equipped to receive what Lisa offers and to give her something she has never managed to find inside the contamination zone. That the story of Lisa Simpson, beneath all the frozen years and all the reset episodes, is the story of someone preparing to go somewhere she has not been yet. Someone accumulating the specific internal resources that will allow her to eventually leave. The flash forward in Lisa's wedding supports this. Adult Lisa is living in London. She is a professor at a university. She is engaged to a man who treats her intelligence as something to engage with rather than something to manage. She has, in that imagined future, found the world that Springfield could not be for her. And when she talks about Springfield in that flash forward, she talks about it with the specific, complicated tenderness of someone who left something behind, not with the grief of someone who is still trapped inside it. The flash forward was then reset. As all flash forwards are reset, Lisa returned to being 8. The departure was undone. The preparation continued. She is still 8. She is still in Springfield. She is still playing her saxophone in her room at that specific volume that fills the house. But the future the show imagined for her, that one glimpsed episode, suggests what the show has always believed about Lisa even while holding her in place. She is not meant to be in Springfield forever. She is meant to leave. She is meant to take everything Springfield could not hold and go somewhere that can. The 8-year-old playing saxophone on Evergreen Terrace is not where the story ends for her. It is where it has been paused. All stories pause somewhere, even the ones that are still running. The pause is not the story. Section 14. Marge, the house, and the architecture of staying. Every theory we have discussed tonight has spent most of its time on Homer and Bart, and Lisa and Maggie and Burns and Ned and Molman. This is the natural tendency when you examine The Simpsons through the lens of mystery and theory. Those characters generate mystery. They resist easy explanation. They present puzzles that reward sustained examination. Marge does not present puzzles in the same way. Marge is, by the show's own design, the center around which the puzzles orbit. She is the reason there is a house on Evergreen Terrace for everyone to come back to. She is the reason there is a dinner table that the family gathers around. She is, in the most literal structural sense, what makes The Simpsons a home rather than a collection of individuals living in proximity. And the show has been careful, across 36 years, to present her in ways that make her competence seem natural and her sacrifice seem unremarkable, which is the most effective way to ensure that both are taken for granted. Consider what Marge has chosen to stay for. Homer is difficult. This is not a harsh assessment. It is a description the show has established through hundreds of episodes of demonstrated behavior. He is impulsive. He makes decisions without considering consequences. He forgets important dates. He has, across the show's run, done things that, in a realistic marriage, would constitute genuine grounds for couples therapy, at minimum, and possibly for the harder conversation. He has embarrassed her publicly on numerous occasions. He has prioritized immediate personal comfort over the family's long-term well-being in ways that have created real problems. He has failed to notice when she needed something that he was capable of providing if he had been paying attention. And Marge has stayed, every time. without requiring extended processing time or ultimatums, with a speed and a completeness of forgiveness that is, if you think about it without the softening of the show's comedic frame, genuinely remarkable. The show has examined whether this is a choice Marge would still make if she fully understood it as a choice. Not many times. The show is careful about how often it opens that particular door, because opening it too wide would let in questions it is not ready to fully answer. But there have been episodes, brief and carefully contained examinations of what Marge's life would look like if she redirected even a portion of her attention and her capability towards something other than holding the house together. In Fear of Flying, Season 6, Marge begins therapy, and the episodes that follow deal with her coming to understand something about herself that she had not consciously acknowledged. That she has things she has wanted that she has set aside. Not because setting them aside was the right thing to do, but because setting them aside was the available thing to do. The thing that allowed everything else to continue functioning. The therapy episodes are the closest the show comes to a serious examination of the specific weight that Marge has been carrying. The weight is not Homer. Not exactly. The weight is the structure, the house, the family, the ongoing project of maintaining the conditions under which four difficult people can live together and survive and occasionally thrive. That project requires a manager, and the manager is Marge. The project does not acknowledge that it requires a manager. The project does not compensate the manager. The project does not ask the manager whether the management role is what they would choose if all available options were genuinely open. It simply requires the management and proceeds on the assumption that the management will continue to be provided. Marge provides it, every episode, without extended complaint, with the specific kind of competence that becomes invisible through its consistency, the way you stop noticing the structural elements of a building that have never failed you. The radiation theory does not have much to say about Marge that it has not already said about everyone else in Springfield. She has the same eyes, the same four fingers, the same yellow skin. She lived inside the contamination zone and absorbed what everyone else absorbed. She worked at the plant for a period. She is as symptomatic as anyone. But her symptoms do not present as physical resilience or cognitive suppression or extraordinary intelligence. Her symptoms present as an extraordinary capacity for patience and management and the ongoing maintenance of other people's lives, which under the radiation framework would be the specific mutation that her particular biology produced in response to the specific exposure she received. Where Homer's mutation produced physical resilience and cognitive impairment, and Maggie's produced extraordinary cognition, Marge's produced something that looks like virtue but is also possibly a compulsion, an inability to let go, an incapacity to step back from the project of maintenance long enough to ask whether the project is worth maintaining. If the coma theory is correct, Marge is the most important person in the dream. Not because Homer loves her most, though that is probably true, because Marge is the dream's proof of concept. If Homer can dream Marge staying, he can believe that she stayed, that she is still there, that when he wakes up, if he wakes up, the woman he dreamed of night after night is the woman who will be sitting by the bed. The dream of Marge is Homer's most fundamental need. Everything else in the Springfield dream, the plant and the neighbors and the adventures, is furniture. Marge is the thing the furniture is arranged around. She is why the dream keeps running. Not because Homer cannot imagine life without the adventures or the neighbors or even the children, though he cannot. Because Homer cannot imagine life without Marge. So he dreams her. Every episode, choosing to stay, choosing him, forgiving everything, being exactly who she has always been. That is either the most romantic thing the show does or the most painful. Possibly both. The house on Evergreen Terrace is the last thing to think about before we close for the night. 742 Evergreen Terrace. 2 stories. Blue exterior, picket fence. A doghouse that Santa's little helper sometimes uses and sometimes does not. A garage that contains an improbable range of equipment related to Homer's various enthusiasms. A kitchen that Marge keeps clean. A living room with a couch in front of a television that the family has spent more hours on than anyone has ever counted. A room for Bart. A room for Lisa. A room for Maggie that she shares with the other children sometimes and that she occupies alone sometimes, and that the show never spends too long inside, because Maggie's inner life is the thing the show is protecting most, carefully. The house is the most stable thing in Springfield. Everything else changes between episodes. The plant reconfigures itself. The town acquires and loses institutions, characters appear and disappear, geography shifts, but 742 Evergreen Terrace is always there. The couch is always there. The family ends up on it, in the closing moments of episodes, again and again. The same positions, the same frame. Homer on one end, Marge next to him, Bart and Lisa arranged around them, the television on. The visual shorthand for everything being okay, for the family being intact, for the house still containing everything the house is supposed to contain. The couch gag is the show's most consistent element. It precedes every episode. It shows the family arriving at the couch from various directions and settling into their places. The gag changes every week. Sometimes it is simple, sometimes it is elaborate, sometimes it is a full animation in a different style, or a reference to another show, or a piece of visual storytelling, entirely disconnected from the episode that follows. But the destination is always the same. The couch, the positions, the family together. Whatever else the episode contains, whatever the couch gag does with the journey, the destination never changes. That destination is a promise the show makes every single week. Whatever happened, the family is intact. Whatever came before the couch is where they end up. Whatever the episode does to them, or asks of them, or reveals about the world they live in, the final image is always the same family in the same positions, in the same house, on the same impossible street. The couch is Springfield's most honest statement about what it is. Not the plant, not the tire fire, not the geography that cannot be located on any real map. The couch, the family, the positions they assume when everything is okay, the promise that everything is okay, has always been okay, will always be okay, regardless of what the episode suggested. Marge makes that possible. She is what makes the house a place the family can keep coming back to. She is the reason the positions on the couch are still the same. She chose to stay. She chooses to stay. Every episode, every reset, every season. She stays, and because she stays, the family stays, and because the family stays, Springfield stays, and because Springfield stays, we can keep going back. Thank you, Marge. The show has never said that properly, but it should. Section 15. The Quickie Mart, Apu, and what Springfield costs its outsiders. There is a building in Springfield that is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. It sells squishies and hot dogs that have been rotating on the same heating rack for a period nobody has ever officially confirmed. It sells lottery tickets and single cigarettes and microwave burritos and expired milk. It has been held up at gunpoint enough times that the event has stopped registering as news inside the show's world. It is the Quickie Mart. And the man behind the counter, the man who has been behind that counter since the very first season and who will presumably be behind it for as long as the show continues to run, is Apu Nahasapi Mapatilon. Apu has a PhD in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology. He graduated at the top of his class. He came to the United States on a student visa, got into a complicated situation involving his dissertation that required him to stay past the visa's expiration, and ended up working at the Quickie Mart. He has been there since 1989 by the show's continuity. He married. He had 8 children simultaneously. He is one of the most hardworking characters in the Springfield ensemble, operating the store on shifts that no reasonable labor framework would permit, serving the same customers, the same items, in the same transactions, while Springfield moves around him unchanged. Apu is a character the show has handled with varying levels of self-awareness across its run, and this is not the place to relitigate the debates that have been had about how he was written in earlier seasons. But what is worth examining tonight, through the lens of the theories we have been working with, is what Apu's situation reveals about how Springfield treats people who came from outside. Start with the contamination frame. Apu arrived in Springfield from outside. He was not born there, did not grow up there, did not absorb the water and the air and the proximity to those crack towers during his formative years. He arrived as an adult, already formed, already carrying the biological baseline of someone who has not been inside Springfield's contamination zone, and yet he has stayed. He has been there for decades. Whatever the plant has been doing to the residents since before they were born, Apu has been absorbing from a standing start. He is, if the radiation theory is correct, the show's only example of a long-term resident who arrived from outside with normal biology and has been accruing exposure ever since. This might explain something the show treats as a comedy, but that is worth looking at straight. Apu works hours that human beings are not designed to sustain. He runs the store alone. He sleeps behind the counter in increments too brief to constitute rest. He manages the constant low-level emergency of being the only working quick E-Mart in a town that is perpetually requiring things from it at 3 in the morning. His endurance is presented as a joke about ambition and immigrant work ethic, and the show has used it as that, but it also sits in interesting proximity to the question of what Springfield's environment does to people who are in it long enough. Homer's physical resilience is the most dramatic expression of what the radiation produces. The question of what decades of lower-level exposure produces in someone who started from a normal biological baseline is one the show has not asked directly. But Apu is the character who would provide the data. He also arrived with things Springfield could not take from him the way it takes things from people born inside it. His education, his intellectual framework, his prior life, the specific texture of who he was before Springfield. The town absorbed him economically. He runs the store that the town needs. He fills the role the town requires filled. But he carries something inside that living in Springfield since birth would have either suppressed or eroded, which is the awareness of what life outside the contamination zone looks like. He has been there. He knows. That knowledge sits somewhere in Apu's character, not always visible but never entirely gone. The Quick E-Mart itself is worth examining as a Springfield institution. It is the node through which the town's daily needs flow. Everyone comes to the Quick E-Mart. Homer comes for donuts and beer. Bart comes for squishies and whatever else a 10-year-old in a convenience store is after. Marge comes when she needs something the larger grocery store does not have, or at a time when the larger grocery store is closed. The Quick E-Mart is Springfield's connective tissue, the place where every thread of the town's daily life intersects at some point. And the person managing that intersection is a man with a computer science PhD from one of the world's better technical universities, making change for hot dog purchases at 2 in the morning. The show has occasionally nodded to the gap between what Apu is and what Springfield is using him for. He is more educated than almost anyone in the town he serves. He is more aware of what exists beyond Springfield's limits than most of its residents. And he stays. He stays because the visa situation is complicated, because the store has become his life, because 8 children require a stable income, because the particular form of trapped that Springfield produces in people who are already there is real even for people who arrived from outside. The Quick E-Mart will be open tomorrow. Apu will be there. The hot dogs will be rotating. The squishy machine will be working or it will be broken and Apu will be fixing it. Springfield will come through the door in its various forms and make its various small transactions and leave and come back and leave again. And Apu will be behind the counter for all of it, watching, serving, staying. Springfield keeps the people it has, even the ones who came from somewhere else, even the ones who know there is somewhere else to go. It keeps them with economics and with obligation, and with the particular weight of a life that has been built inside one set of walls long enough that taking it apart and moving it feels more impossible than staying. Springfield does not need radiation to trap people. It just needs enough time. Section 16. The Treehouse of Horror, and what happens when Springfield drops the mask. Every October, Springfield stops pretending. The Treehouse of Horror is the annual Halloween anthology special that has aired every year since Season 2. It operates outside the show's main continuity. Deaths in Treehouse episodes do not count. Events in Treehouse episodes do not carry forward. The Springfield that exists in the main canon does not have to absorb what happens in the Treehouse. It is an officially designated space where the show's usual rules are suspended, where characters can die and monsters can be real and the ending does not have to be okay. The interesting question is what the show does with that freedom. Because the Treehouse episodes are not random. They are not a break from the show's themes. They are the show's themes operating without the comedy's softening layer. Every story the main series tells in coded form, with jokes and resets and the reassurance that the family will be on the couch by the end, the Treehouse tells directly. The contamination and mutation that the radiation theory traces through 36 seasons of careful accumulation, the Treehouse shows you openly in episodes where Springfield residents are literally transformed by exposure to foreign substances, where the human form is explicitly modified by the environment. where the boundary between what the town is producing and what the town's people are becoming is not maintained through the usual polite distance. The treehouse versions of Homer and Bart and Lisa do not age any differently than the main series versions. They are still frozen at the same ages. They still live in the same house. But they exist in a space where the show does not have to pretend that the darkness is only comedy, where Homer can be a monster and the episode does not have to end with him being okay, where Springfield can be invaded or destroyed and the destruction does not have to be cleaned up by next week because it was always cleaned by next week for other reasons. The first Treehouse episode aired in 1990, the second season, and it established the template that every subsequent special has followed. 3 short horror stories, introduced by a framing device, operating outside continuity, free to go places the main series cannot. In 34 years of Halloween specials, the show has returned to certain categories of story with a consistency that is worth noticing. It returns, again and again, to stories about transformation, about what happens when Springfield residents are changed by something external into something other than what they were, about the boundary between human and something else being crossed and what comes after the crossing. The main series argues through the radiation theory framework that this transformation has already happened, is ongoing, has been happening since before any of the characters were born. The Treehouse makes it explicit and dramatic and visible. It shows you the transformation happening, fast and obvious and impossible to miss, in a space where you are allowed to notice it. It returns again and again to stories about authority and the ways authority becomes monstrous. Burns in various Treehouse configurations is often even more openly villainous than he is in the main series, because the Treehouse does not need to maintain the fiction that Burns's villainy is ultimately a joke, a thing to be resolved or forgiven or absorbed into the normal order of Springfield by the episode's end. In the Treehouse, Burns can be the monster the radiation theory says he has always been. The mask is off. The show is showing you what it actually thinks about the man who runs the plant, and it returns most consistently to stories about death, about what happens when Springfield's usual resilience and its usual resets and its usual insistence on survival are removed, about what it looks like when the loop actually breaks. Characters die in Treehouse episodes, multiple characters, sometimes the main family, sometimes everyone. And the show examines, in these contained and officially non-canonical spaces, what it would look like if Springfield's immunity to consequence were taken away, if the reset button did not exist, if the loop could actually end. The Treehouse episodes are the show's unconscious, the place where everything the main series manages through comedy and through the reassurance of the reset is allowed to surface without management. The fears the show cannot express directly, about contamination and mortality and the monstrous nature of the institutions that surround the family, the Treehouse expresses in costume. In officially labeled fiction within the fiction, in a space that is separated from the main canon precisely so that the main canon does not have to acknowledge what it contains. But the Treehouse stories come from the same writers and are produced by the same people and run in the same show. The fears they express are the show's fears. The darkness they depict is the show's darkness. The monsters are the show's monsters, wearing Halloween masks instead of suits and yellow skin. Every October, Springfield drops the mask. The rest of the year, it puts it back on. The mask is the comedy is the mask. And underneath both of them, in the Treehouse and in every main series episode, if you know how to look, is the same contaminated town with the same compromised population, living the same loop that started in 1989 and has never been allowed to end. The Treehouse is honest. The main series is careful. Both are the same show. And both are trying to tell you the same thing, in very different registers, about a town and a family and a system that has been doing something to the people inside it for longer than anyone is willing to directly say. Section 17. Santa's Little Helper, the Family Dog, and What the Animals Know. Santa's Little Helper came to The Simpsons by accident. The family found him at a dog racing track on Christmas Eve, after Homer had lost their holiday money betting on him in a race. He was a greyhound who had just lost his last race and been abandoned by his owner on the track. Homer, who had just lost money because of this dog, brought him home anyway. He became the family dog. He has been the family dog since season 1. He is one of the longest continuously appearing characters in the show's entire run. He has been present in the background of Springfield family life for 36 years of episodes. And like everyone else in Springfield, he has never aged. He is a dog. Dogs do not live 36 years. The floating timeline protects Santa's little helper from this arithmetic the same way it protects everyone else, by simply declining to apply the arithmetic. But Santa's little helper carries a specific piece of evidence for the radiation theory that most discussions of the theory underweight. He has the same bulging eyes as his owners. This is presented as a design choice, as a consistent aesthetic of the show that applies to all characters regardless of species. And that explanation is available, but within the show's own logic, within the world the show has built and maintained, Santa's little helper is a dog who grew up in Springfield and whose eyes protrude in exactly the way that the eyes of every Springfield permanent resident protrude. The same eyes that appear in Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie and every named background character who has lived in Springfield long enough. A dog who was in Springfield as a puppy and has been there ever since, absorbing the same water and the same air and living under the same proximity to the same cracked towers as his family. The show told you through Blinky the three-eyed fish that the plant's runoff alters the biology of animals in the Springfield environment. The fish are the direct and explicit evidence. Blinky is the show saying out loud, "Look at what this is doing to the animals." And then Santa's little helper is in the background of 36 years of episodes with eyes that look exactly like every other Springfield resident's eyes. And the show does not connect those two things directly, and most viewers do not connect them either. But the connection is there. Same environment, same exposure, same visual marker of something having been done to the biology of the organisms living inside the contamination zone. The three-eyed fish are the explicit version. Santa's little helper is the version hiding in the background of every family scene that the show has filmed for 36 years, quietly confirming the theory in every episode that shows the dog without ever saying a word about what the dog's eyes mean. There is also a pattern in the stories the show tells about Santa's little helper specifically. He is repeatedly lost, repeatedly endangered, repeatedly placed in situations where he might not come back, and then brought back safely. He has been sold and returned. He has been injured and recovered. He has been given away and reclaimed. He has been in more jeopardy, proportionally, than any other family member who is not Homer. And every time he is endangered and every time he returns, the family's response is the specific relief of people who understand that losing him would be losing something they cannot replace. Because Santa's little helper is the one member of the family who has never chosen to be there. Homer was born into the family. Marge married into it. Bart and Lisa and Maggie were born into it. Santa's little helper was picked up off a racetrack by a man who had just lost money because of him and brought home on an impulse. He did not choose the Simpsons. The Simpsons chose him. And that specific quality of being chosen rather than choosing is part of what makes his presence in the family feel different, feel unconditional in a direction that runs the other way from how unconditional love usually runs. The dog loves the family the way animals love the people who feed them and shelter them and keep them safe, which is to say completely and without conditions and without the complicated architecture of obligation and history and grievance that human love carries. Santa's little helper does not hold anything against Homer. He does not remember the lost money on the racetrack. He does not have a list of complaints. He is simply and entirely there, happy to be in the house, happy to see whoever walks through the door, performing exactly the role that a family dog performs, which is to make the house feel inhabited and warmed in a way that the people alone cannot quite manage. And his eyes are wrong in exactly the way that every other set of eyes in Springfield is wrong, because he is part of Springfield now. He has been part of Springfield for 36 years, and Springfield does not leave its residents unchanged. Not the people, not the fish, not the dog who came from a racetrack on Christmas Eve and stayed because the family kept him, and has been in the background of every family scene since then, with his particular eyes, confirming quietly in every episode what the show has been trying to tell you since Season 2. Section 18. Moe's Tavern and the Mythology of the Bar. Moe Sislak has been tending bar at Moe's Tavern for 36 years. The tavern is a specific place, not just a setting. It has a particular light and a particular atmosphere and a particular group of regulars who occupy its bar stools with the comfortable permanence of people who have nowhere else to be and have stopped looking. Barney Gumble, Lenny, Carl, Homer. They come to Moe's the way some people come to church, not for what they find there exactly, but for the ritual, for the confirmation that the thing is still there and still operating and still the same. Moe himself is the show's most consistently sad character who is not Ned Flanders. He is unlucky in love in ways the show has treated as comedy across 36 years, but that accumulate into something that is not entirely comfortable to look at directly. Every romantic possibility the show opens for him closes. Every relationship he approaches with some version of hope is taken away. He has expressed across multiple episodes a relationship with his own unhappiness that suggests it has become structural, that he has organized his sense of self around the expectation of not getting the things he wants, and that the expectation is so deeply embedded that it has started operating as a prophecy he fulfills by carrying it. The bar is the most stable relationship Moe has. He has run it for 36 years. He knows everyone who comes through the door. He knows what they drink and what they are likely to say and what they are running from, in the way that bartenders know things that therapists learn more slowly. He is the keeper of Springfield's worst secrets, or at least the secrets Springfield wants to feel worst about in a comfortable and contained environment, which is what a tavern is for. Moe's Tavern has been destroyed and rebuilt. It was financially ruined by Burns during the Who Shot Mr. Burns arc and recovered somehow, the way Springfield institutions always recover, without the show being required to explain the mechanism. It has been the site of several crises and several moments of genuine human connection. It is where Homer drinks. It is where Barney drinks. It is where the men of Springfield go when they need to not be somewhere else. The bar operates in the show as the complement to Marge's kitchen. The kitchen is where the family processes what happens to it, where conversations happen around the table, where Marge manages the domestic center of the loop. The bar is where the men of Springfield go when the loop is too much, when the house feels too present, when what they need is to sit on a stool and hold a glass, and not be asked to be anything in particular for a while. The kitchen holds the family together. The bar holds the men together in a different way, a looser way, without the intentionality that Marge brings to the kitchen's function. Moe keeps the bar going, the same way Marge keeps the house going. Without being thanked for it, without anyone fully noticing the labor that keeping it requires, without anyone acknowledging that the thing they take for granted as permanent and reliable is only permanent and reliable because someone is continuously making it so. The prank calls are part of the mythology of the tavern, and they are worth a moment. Bart calls the bar and asks for a fictional person whose name, when spoken aloud, becomes an embarrassing joke. Moe falls for it every time. The names change, but the structure never does. Bart constructs the setup, Moe delivers the punchline, realizes he has been had again, responds with a threat, and hangs up. The cycle repeats. It has been repeating since season 1. This is, in miniature, the structure of the whole show. Setup, delivery, reset. The prank call always ends the same way. The bar always opens the next day. Moe is always there. Bart is always 10. The number is always the same. The call will always come again. But within the mythology of the prank call, there is also a specific relationship. Bart calls Moe. Moe answers. Every time. He knows, at some level, that Bart is going to call. The show has run long enough that this is a feature of Moe's world that he has absorbed and built around. He answers anyway. Because answering is what you do when the phone rings. Because stopping answering would be an acknowledgement that the prank has won. Because Moe's relationship to the loop the prank represents is the same as Springfield's relationship to every other loop it runs. You keep doing what you have always done. You answer the phone, you make the threat, you hang up, you wait for it to happen again, not because it produces anything different, but because the structure of the repetition is itself a kind of meaning. Moe tends bar. Springfield comes to drink. Bart calls with a name. The sun is blocked by Burns's device, and then unblocked. Homer falls down something and gets back up. The family ends up on the couch. And the credits roll and the next episode starts and Springfield is Springfield is Springfield. There is comfort in that. The show understands this. It has always understood this. The reliability of the structure is the point. Moe's Tavern will be there tomorrow. The beer will be cold. The regulars will be on their stools. And the phone will ring, and Mo will answer it and fall for it again, because that is what Mo does, and Springfield needs someone to answer the phone and fall for the prank so that Bart can be Bart and the loop can keep running and nobody has to acknowledge how long it has been running or how long it is going to run. That is Moe's Tavern. That is what it is for. Section 19. The Tire Fire, the Gorge, and Springfield's Geography of Damage. There is a tire fire in Springfield that has been burning for years. Nobody remembers when it started. Nobody is working on putting it out. It is simply there, a permanent fixture of the town's landscape, burning with the specific quality of a thing that has been burning so long. It has become part of what the place is, rather than an emergency the place needs to address. The smoke rises from it the way smoke rises from any industrial installation, as background, as texture, as the color of the air on the horizon when you stand on the right side of town and look south. Springfield has a gorge. It is called Springfield Gorge, and it is the gorge that Homer attempts to jump on his skateboard in the Season 2 episode, Bart the Daredevil, failing dramatically and descending the far wall of the gorge twice, in a sequence that is one of the most purely funny things the show has ever done. The gorge exists. It is a real geographic feature of Springfield. It is also not a gorge you would find in any geology textbook because its relationship to the rest of Springfield's geography is, like everything else about Springfield's geography, impossible. These details, the tire fire and the gorge and the harbor and the mountain and the desert that the show has placed within reasonable driving distance of each other, constitute the show's geographic vocabulary. Springfield is assembled from the wreckage of other American places. It contains every American environmental failure and every American natural wonder in proximity to each other without regard for whether that proximity is physically possible. The tire fire is the most honest element of Springfield's geography. It is not hidden. It is not underground. It is not something you have to examine the evidence carefully to find. It is right there, burning, visible from a significant portion of the town, a continuously active environmental hazard that everyone in Springfield has long ago stopped perceiving as a problem because it has been present for long enough to become familiar. This is how Springfield treats most of its problems. Long enough familiarity converts anything from a problem into a feature. The plant's cooling towers were once an anomaly. Now they are the skyline. The three-eyed fish was once national news. Now it is something the show has moved on from, because Springfield moved on from it. The tire fire was presumably once an emergency. Now it is just part of the horizon. The gorge is the inverse. It is a natural feature, not a human-made catastrophe, but it occupies the same structural role in Springfield's geography that the tire fire does. It is a thing that is simply there, that has always been there from the perspective of anyone living inside the show's timeline, that is accepted as a condition of the landscape rather than as something worth explaining or questioning. Homer goes into the gorge twice in that one episode and is pulled out twice, injured and bandaged, and then goes back in a third time because the ambulance crashes. It is funny. The gorge does not change. The gorge will be there the next time an episode requires a gorge. Springfield's geography is assembled from whatever the episode needs and maintained between episodes through the same mechanism that maintains everything else in Springfield, agreement not to examine it too closely. The tire fire burns. The gorge sits. The harbor harbors. The nuclear plant generates power, with 342 violations and chewing gum patches, and a safety inspector asleep at his desk. The mountain is there when the episode needs a mountain. The desert appears when the episode needs a desert. The ocean is wherever the coast needs to be. Springfield is not a place. It is a collection of American feelings about places, assembled without apology into a single impossible location that contains everything and commits to nothing. And at the center of all of it, the tire fire burns. Continuously. Without anyone putting it out. Without anyone asking why it has not been put out. Without anyone calculating what that smoke contains or where it goes when the wind takes it east toward town. The smoke from the tire fire mixes with whatever comes off the plant's towers. The water from the river carries whatever runs off the plant's waste disposal into the drinking supply. The air contains whatever 36 years of a burning tire fire and a nuclear plant with 342 violations has contributed to it. And the people of Springfield breathe that air and drink that water and live under that sky and have the eyes they have and the fingers they have and the hair they have and the yellow skin they have. The tire fire is a metaphor. The gorge is a metaphor. The nuclear plant is a metaphor that is not quite a metaphor, because the show is too committed to its specificity for it to be entirely symbolic. All of it together is Springfield. All of it together is America in a specific register that the show has been hitting for 36 years. The place where the damage accumulates in plain sight and stops being visible because it has been there long enough. The place where the fire burns and nobody comes to put it out because the fire has been there since before anyone alive can remember it starting. The place where the cracked tower holds, for now, for one more week. Section 20. Grandpa Simpson and the weight of what is not said. Abraham Simpson is Homer's father. He lives in the Springfield retirement castle, which is the same retirement castle that Burns's geological interference collapsed during the Who Shot Mr. Burns arc, and which was subsequently rebuilt without anyone addressing the circumstances of its destruction. He has been there for most of the show's run, telling stories that wander away from their own point, insisting on the relevance of a past that nobody around him is interested in engaging with, and being visited by Homer with the specific irregular guilt of someone who knows they should go more often, and goes as often as they can bring themselves to. Abe Simpson is the keeper of the show's buried history. He knows more about what happened before the show began than anyone else currently alive in Springfield's canon. He knows about Mona Simpson's disappearance and the real reason she left. He knows about the deal he struck with Burns to protect Homer's job. He knows about the grave he showed Homer, the one that belonged to Walt Whitman rather than to his wife. He has been carrying all of this for decades, in a retirement home, telling stories nobody listens to, waiting to be visited. The tragedy of Grandpa Simpson, when you look at it directly rather than through the show's comedy frame, is specific. He made a series of choices in the past that he judged to be protective. He hid Mona's disappearance from Homer to protect Homer from a truth that would have been painful. He struck the deal with Burns to protect Homer's livelihood. He chose silence and arrangement over honesty because honesty, at each of those junctures, seemed like the more dangerous option. And then he had to live with the consequences of those choices, watching Homer grow up shaped by the wounds those choices were designed to prevent, understanding that his protective instinct had produced the damage he was trying to avoid, unable to go back. Abe is the character who knows that what you hide does not disappear. It just shows up differently. Homer's desperate need for approval, his terror of abandonment, his inability to stand up to Burns despite working for him his entire adult life, all of these are downstream of the choices Abe made in 1969 and in the years after. Abe can see this. He is intelligent enough to understand the chain of causality. He is old enough to have watched the chain play out across decades. He cannot undo it. He can only sit in the retirement home and tell stories that wander away from the point and wait for Homer to visit. The show has given Abe flashes of genuine and complete humanity in among the comedy. The episode that reveals his wartime history contains him with real complexity, showing the gap between the man he was and the man the years, and the choices and the particular gravity of old age and obscurity have left behind. The episode that involves Mona's return catches Abe in a moment of reckoning, having to account for what he told Homer about where Mona was and why. Standing in the presence of the woman his choices helped drive underground, unable to undo any of it. What the show has never fully reckoned with, because reckoning with it would require the show to hold a sustained accounting that its episodic structure will not permit, is what Abe's choices mean for the rest of the family's history. If Abe had told Homer the truth about Mona, if he had explained rather than hidden, Homer would have grown up with a different wound or possibly no wound at all in that particular location. The emotional architecture of Homer's adult life, the desperation and the compliance and the specific quality of his love for Marge that has always had fear embedded in it, all of it would be different. The man Burns needed to run Sector 7G would not have existed in the form he exists. Whether Burns would then have manufactured a different version of that man through different means is unknowable. But Abe's choices shaped what was available. The retirement home is where the show stores its history. The people who remember things that the town has decided to forget, the people who carry knowledge about the past that conflicts with the agreed-upon version, tend to end up in the retirement home. It is a convenient location for the narrative, far enough from the center of Springfield's daily operations that what happens there does not interfere with the loop, close enough that Homer can visit when the episode requires it. Abe waits. His stories wander away from their own points because the points are the things he has decided he cannot say directly. He talks around the weight of what he carries. He tells stories about the war and about the past and about how things used to be, and underneath all of it is the specific gravity of a man who knows what he did and has not found a way to fully account for it, and who has been waiting in a retirement home for years for someone to ask him the right question so he can finally say the thing he has been circling around for decades. Nobody has asked him yet. The show may never let anyone ask, but the wait is there. You can see it in the way the stories wander. You can see it in the way he looks at Homer sometimes, with something more complicated than the simple expression of a father proud of his son. The wait is there. It has always been there. It just has not been said. Section 21. The monorail, the lemon tree, and what Springfield fights for. There is a specific category of Simpsons episode that does not fit cleanly into any of the theories we have been working with tonight. These are the episodes about what Springfield fights for. What the town, in its collective and disorganized and sometimes unhinged way, decides matters enough to mobilize around. These episodes reveal something about Springfield that the contamination theory and the coma theory and the denial framework all underweight. Springfield is not only a town of damage, it is also, sometimes, a town of genuine and particular love. Marge vs. the Monorail is Season 4, Episode 12, and it is one of the most beloved episodes the show has ever produced. Springfield receives a large financial settlement. The town debates what to do with the money. A charismatic salesman named Lyle Landley arrives and sells the town a monorail with the ease of someone who has found the specific con that a specific audience cannot resist. Springfield buys the monorail. The monorail is a disaster in the specific way that things sold by charismatic salesmen to credulous communities tend to be disasters. Homer, who has been hired as the conductor, has to prevent a catastrophic runaway train from destroying the town. The episode is a comedy about civic gullibility. It is also, under the surface, about something more sympathetic. Springfield wanted the monorail because it wanted to believe it deserved something grand. The town had money, and it wanted to spend the money on something that would make it feel like more than what it already was. The monorail represented possibility, civic ambition, the specific aspiration of a community that knows it is a little bit of a joke and wants to believe it can be something else. Lyle Landley sold Springfield a dream, and Springfield bought it because communities like Springfield are always looking for something to believe about themselves that is a little better than the available evidence supports. That is not stupidity. That is hope, an impractical and easily exploited form of hope, but hope. Lemon of Troy, Season 6, Episode 24. Springfield's lemon tree, a tree with community significance and history, is stolen by kids from the neighboring town of Shelbyville. The Simpson children, with some adult assistance, mount a rescue operation to retrieve it. The episode is a small-stakes adventure, a children's quest story, funny and self-aware about its own slight absurdity. But the lemon tree matters because it is something Springfield recognizes as worth fighting for. The tree has a history. It has been there long enough to mean something. When Shelbyville takes it, Springfield responds not with indifference or with the same amnesia it applies to the three-eyed fish and the nuclear plant violations and the principal who was a fraud, but with genuine collective motivation to get it back. The children mobilize. The adults mobilize. The town, which cannot sustain awareness of the fact that it is a classified environmental hazard, can sustain awareness of the fact that its lemon tree has been taken. The things Springfield chooses to protect reveal the show's emotional center more clearly than the things Springfield chooses to ignore. It ignores the plant. It ignores the contamination. It ignores the evidence of what has been done to its residents by the thing that provides their electricity. But it will mobilize to recover a lemon tree. It will buy a monorail. It will riot over trivial matters with a speed and a completeness that the actual crises in its life never produce. This is not only a joke about civic irrationality, it is accurate. Communities mobilize around symbols and around legible, immediate objects and around things that feel concrete and recoverable. They struggle to mobilize around invisible, ongoing, structural harms that have no clear endpoint and no satisfying moment of resolution. Springfield ignores the contamination not only because the contamination has damaged the part of its brain responsible for noticing contamination, though the radiation theory says it has. Springfield ignores the contamination because contamination is the kind of problem that does not present as a recoverable object. You cannot go get the contamination back. You cannot rescue it from Shelbyville. You cannot buy it with a federal settlement and watch it glide triumphantly through town. The lemon tree you can get back. The monorail you can have. The plant is a different kind of problem, the kind of problem that requires sustained systemic attention over years, and the willingness to hold an institution accountable through mechanisms that are slow and uncertain, and that may produce nothing satisfying at their conclusion. Springfield is not built for that kind of problem. No community entirely is. So, Springfield fights for the lemon tree. It buys the monorail. It mobilizes its children to make a movie and holds a contest and forms a mob over a bear and riots at the drop of something trivial and enormous and immediately legible. And the plant runs. The towers leak. The water carries what the water carries. And everyone drinks it. The love is real. The mobilization is real. The community feeling that produces the lemon tree rescue and the monorail purchase is a genuine thing about Springfield that the contamination and the coma and the denial do not fully explain or account for. There is something in this town that is alive and that chooses its objects and that fights for what it can see and what it can name and what it can imagine winning back. The tragedy is that the thing most worth fighting for is the thing the town is least equipped to see. Section 22. The Golden Age and Why We Needed It to Exist. There is a period of The Simpsons that fans refer to as the Golden Age. It runs approximately from Season 3 through Season 8, with some arguments for including Season 2 at the beginning, and some for including Season 9 before the consensus turns against it. These are the seasons that produce the episodes that are most quoted, most referenced, most studied, most frequently cited as the best television comedy ever made by people who are willing to say something like that out loud. The Last Exit to Springfield. Marge versus The Monorail, Homer the Great, Lisa's Substitute. The episodes that demonstrated what the show could do when everything was working. The comedy and the emotion and the satire and the character development all operating simultaneously at a level of precision and control that is genuinely rare in any medium. The Golden Age produces something specific in people who experienced it during its original run. A particular conviction that the show was and always would be what those seasons were, and that the seasons that followed represented a departure from something real and essential, rather than the natural trajectory of a show trying to sustain itself across decades of production. The grief for the Golden Age is real. It is not snobbery or nostalgia distortion. Those seasons are as good as their reputation, and the reputation is deserved. But the Golden Age needs to be examined through the lens of the theories, because the Golden Age is the period the coma theory says ended when Homer went into the coma and the dream began. If the coma theory is correct, the Golden Age is the last period of Homer's waking creative life translating into the show. The grounded family drama, the recognizable human problems treated with genuine emotional honesty, the sense that the stakes of Springfield were legible and real, that quality belongs to the pre-coma era and to the episodes that immediately followed the coma before the dream destabilized. The Golden Age is what the show looked like when it was still connected to something with weight and consequence. The post-Golden Age is what it looked like when the dream took over, and the connection to weight and consequence was severed by the event of April 1993. This reading makes the transition from the Golden Age to what came after more precise than the fan discourse usually gets. It is not that the writers ran out of ideas or got lazy or stopped caring. It is that the source material changed. The show was drawing from something real in the early seasons, from whatever the original vision contained that had genuine emotional substance. And then the source material became the dream of a man who is slowly losing brain function in a hospital bed, and the dream is vivid and entertaining and sometimes very funny, but it is not grounded in the same substance as what came before it. The dream cannot be. Dreams are not grounded. That is the nature of dreams. The Golden Age fans are mourning something real. The thing they are mourning is the pre-coma Simpsons. The show that was capable of making Homer's unemployment feel like something with real stakes because economic anxiety in that household was drawn from genuine observation of what financial stress does to a family. The show that could make Marge's consideration of infidelity feel genuinely dangerous because it was taking seriously the specific tension of a marriage between two people who love each other and are also genuinely mismatched in important ways. The show that gave Lisa's loneliness the specific texture of a real child's loneliness Not a concept of loneliness, but the actual experience of being 8 years old and too smart for the room you are in, and not knowing what to do about that. That show required a level of attention and care and connection to recognizable human experience that the Dream era does not consistently provide. Not because the writers failed, because the structure changed. Because April 1993 happened and the source material became something different. The Golden Age will never come back. Not because the show's writers are different, or the culture is different, or the audience has changed. Because Homer is still in the hospital bed, and the dream does not recapture the pre-coma texture no matter how hard it tries. The dream can do many things. It can be very funny. It can produce individual episodes that touch the quality of the Golden Age for 22 minutes. But it cannot sustain the grounded weight that made those early seasons what they were, because sustaining that weight requires the kind of connection to reality that the dream severed the moment the vending machine fell. The Golden Age fans are right that something changed. They are right that what came after is different from what came before. They are locating the change in the wrong place when they say the writers failed. The change happened in a hospital room on the 1st of April 1993. The show has been dreaming ever since. And the Golden Age, preserved in the memory of everyone who watched it, is the last artifact of Homer's waking life that the show produced before the dream began. It was very good. It was as good as anything television has made. And it could not have lasted, because nothing that real can last forever in a place like Springfield. Something always comes along to take the clarity away. Section 23. Springfield's recurring disasters, and why they never stick. Springfield has been destroyed, more than once. More than several times. The show has, across its run, subjected the town to floods, fires, tornadoes, earthquakes, invasions, economic collapses, ecological catastrophes, and the specific collective injury of having the sun blocked by a mechanical device operated by the richest man in town. The Simpsons movie added the Federal Dome. Every treehouse of horror has added its own seasonal apocalypse. Springfield has been devastated, flattened, overrun, sealed, flooded, burned, and invaded repeatedly across 36 years of episodes. And every single time, by the following week's episode, Springfield is fine. The reset is the show's most obvious structural feature and the one that requires the most explanation if you want to take Springfield seriously as a place with internal logic rather than as a production convenience. And what we have built across tonight's theories is multiple overlapping explanations for why the reset happens, each of which provides a different frame for the same observed phenomenon. The radiation theory says the reset is a product of cognitive damage. The contamination has compromised the neurological infrastructure responsible for maintaining episodic memory across time. The residents of Springfield cannot sustain awareness of past catastrophes, not because they choose not to, but because the capacity for that kind of sustained memory has been eroded by what they have been absorbing for decades. They forget the dome not because they want to forget the dome, but because their brains cannot hold it in place long enough for it to affect their behavior. The coma theory says the reset is a feature of dreaming. Dreams do not accumulate consequences the way waking experience does. Each dream cycle begins fresh. The state of the world at the beginning of one dream does not carry into the next one. Homer's brain runs Springfield as a dream, and the dream resets because that is what dreams do when they cycle through. The destruction is not undone. It is simply not carried forward. The new cycle begins from the baseline, because the baseline is the dreamer's last waking image, and the dream always starts from the image it has. The collective denial theory says the reset is a social choice. The principal and the pauper showed you the mechanism. Springfield votes to not remember. It issues the legal equivalent of a reset decree. It exiles anyone who insists on carrying the previous episode's catastrophe into the current one. The reset is not unconscious forgetting. It is active, collective, unanimously endorsed decision-making about which version of reality the community is willing to live inside. All three of these explanations are available. All three have evidence supporting them. All three describe a real feature of how Springfield operates, through different mechanisms that produce the same visible result. But there is a fourth explanation that none of the theories quite says directly. The reset happens because catastrophe is the normal state of Springfield, and normal states do not accumulate. When something happens that often, When disaster strikes with the frequency that disaster strikes Springfield, the individual instances stop being discrete events that modify the world. They become the baseline condition. Springfield does not recover from its catastrophes. Springfield has a baseline that includes catastrophes at a certain frequency, and what looks like recovery from a specific catastrophe is actually the town returning to its normal relationship with catastrophe in general, which is that catastrophe is always present and always pending and never finally resolved. The plant has 342 violations. The dome came down and came up again. The sun was blocked and then unblocked. Moe's bar was destroyed and rebuilt. The retirement castle was collapsed and rebuilt. Springfield Elementary lost its funding and somehow continued. All of these things happened. All of them were catastrophes in their moment. And all of them are now simply part of the record of a place that has been living with catastrophe as a condition rather than as an event. This is the frame that connects Springfield most directly to the real places in the real world that Springfield is supposed to represent. The communities that exist inside ongoing damage, that have been living with industrial pollution or economic collapse or institutional failure long enough that the damage has stopped being news and started being the landscape, communities where the cracked infrastructure is not a crisis, because it has been cracked for long enough that the cracking is what the infrastructure looks like now. Communities where the kids grow up knowing the water is not quite right, and the air is not quite right, and certain things are just the way things are around here. Those communities do not reset. They absorb. The damage accumulates in the bodies and the buildings and the air without producing the kind of acute crisis that generates response and resolution. And the people inside them develop, over time, a relationship with the damage that is not acceptance exactly and is not denial exactly but is something in between, a managed relationship with ongoing harm that allows daily life to continue inside it because daily life has no other option. Springfield resets because Springfield can. It is a fictional town with the specific protective magic of fiction, which is that the destruction can be undone between episodes, that the town can be devastated in the finale and fine by the time the new season begins. Real communities do not get that. Real communities accumulate. The damage is permanent. The kids grow up with it. Springfield's resets are the show's most generous gift to its audience. The reassurance that things can come back from their worst, that the dome can be removed, that the sun can be unblocked, that the family can survive anything and still end up on the couch together by the credits. It is the fantasy that harm is reversible, that damage can be undone, that Springfield, and by extension the version of America Springfield represents, is more resilient than the evidence suggests it ought to be. The gift is real, the generosity is real, and the thing it is protecting you from knowing is also real, sitting just underneath the surface of every reset, which is that in the actual communities Springfield is supposed to represent, the dome does not come off. The damage does not get undone. The water stays the way the water is, and the people drinking it have the eyes they have. Section 24. Why Springfield is still on. The Simpsons is still on. This is, by any reasonable measure, an extraordinary fact. The show has outlasted every reasonable expectation for how long something like it should exist. It has outlasted the careers of some of the people who made it. It has outlasted several of the cultural moments and several of the cultural conversations it was originally responding to. It has continued while animated television around it changed completely, while the platforms through which television reaches audiences transformed several times, while the audience itself aged from children watching on Saturday mornings into adults who now watch with their own children on devices that did not exist when the show began. The question of why it is still on has two answers. The practical answer is economic. The Simpsons generates significant ongoing revenue for the entities that own and distribute it. It occupies a reliable slot in a programming schedule that benefits from the reliability. It requires a production infrastructure that can be maintained because the show has been producing episodes for so long that the infrastructure knows how to produce them. These are real reasons, and they are sufficient in the industry sense, meaning they explain the continued production without requiring any additional justification, but they do not explain the audience. They explain why Fox keeps making the show. They do not explain why people keep watching it, why the show keeps finding new viewers, why something that has been on for 36 years continues to be culturally present in a way that most things that have been around for 36 years are not. The audience is there because The Simpsons does something that is genuinely difficult to replace. It provides a consistent and reliable return to a specific emotional address. The house on Evergreen Terrace is a place that a very large number of people have been visiting for a very long time. It is familiar in the specific way that places you have been returning to for years are familiar, not because each visit is the same, but because the underlying structure is stable. The couch is in the same place. The family is in their positions. Homer comes through the door, the television is on. The specific texture of this household, loud and chaotic and full of love in the particular forms that love takes when it is expressed by people who are not very good at expressing it, has been available for 36 years to anyone who wanted to return to it. This is what the floating timeline actually provides. Not just the frozen ages of the characters, the frozen emotional address. The guarantee that when you come back the place will be what it was, that the house will not have changed into something unrecognizable, that the family will not have become people you do not know, that the version of Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie that you carry in your memory will correspond to the version you find when you return. For some viewers, the show has been running their entire conscious life. They were born after 1989 and they grew up with it, and it was always there, and it will always have been there. For others, it is something they encountered at a specific age and that carries the specific emotional texture of that age, the way certain songs carry the texture of the year you first heard them. Either way, the show is part of the furniture of a very large number of people's internal landscapes. Turning it off permanently would be a different kind of ending than most shows produce when they conclude. It would be removing something from the furniture. The show staying on is, among other things, a decision to not remove the furniture, to keep Evergreen Terrace available, to keep the emotional address open for returns. This is also what makes the theories matter. The theories exist because people who have been visiting Evergreen Terrace for a long time started looking at it differently, started asking what the house is built on, started examining the walls for evidence of what is behind them, started noticing the pattern in the yellow skin and the four fingers and the reset button and the man who cannot die and the woman who will not grow up and the town that cannot find itself on any map. The theories are the audience's way of taking the show seriously as the thing it actually is, rather than the thing it presents itself as. They are the gesture of treating Springfield as a real place with real implications rather than as a backdrop for gags. They are, in the deepest sense, an act of love for something the audience has been living with long enough to want to understand more completely. You have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. You have followed the theories down into the foundations and found what is underneath. You know now about the plant, and the coma, and the shooting, and the immortality, and the denied truth, and the strategic silence, and the borrowed predictions, and the stolen mother, and the unfindable location, and the frozen time, and the man who dies and comes back, and the man who does everything right, and receives silence, and the dog whose eyes are wrong, and the fire that keeps burning, and the gorge that sits, and the tree worth fighting for, and the age that ended, and the disasters that reset, and the house that stays open. You know all of that, and none of it changes the couch. None of it changes the fact that the couch is there, and the family is on it, and the credits will roll, and the next episode will start, and Springfield will be Springfield again. Maybe that is the final thing the theories tell you. Not that Springfield is wrong or broken or sinister, though it is all of those things, but that the wrongness and the brokenness and the sinister quality are the conditions in which something genuinely loving has been trying to survive for 36 years. The family is real despite the contamination. The love is real despite the coma. The comedy is real despite the darkness underneath it. And the house on Evergreen Terrace, however many theories you apply to understand what it is built on, is real in the specific way that fictional places become real when enough people love them long enough. Springfield is still on. It will be there tomorrow, and the day after that. And whatever the loop produces next will be strange and funny and imperfect, and it will reset by the end, and the family will be on the couch, and everything will be fine. Get some rest. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. A note on what you have just heard. Every section of this script drew from the same source. The show itself. The 342 violations are canon. The coma is canon. Maggie's final shot is canon. Burns's glowing medical treatment is canon. Armin Tamzarian is canon. The deal Abe made with Burns is canon. Mona's fugitive status and the antibiotic bomb are canon. The contest nobody won is documented on the DVD commentary. Al Jean's denial is on the record. The alternate endings were produced and screened. None of the theories are official. The show has never confirmed the coma or the radiation as intentional overarching frames. The writers, when asked, tend to say the show is a comedy, and the continuity errors are just continuity errors, and the floating timeline is just how animated shows work, and Maggie shot Burns because Maggie shot Burns. They might be right. Most of the time they probably are. But the theories survive because they do something the official explanations do not. They treat Springfield as a place that means something beyond the individual gags. They treat Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie as people whose circumstances have consequences, and whose situations have causes, and whose lives, however frozen and however impossible, reflect something about the actual world those lives are supposed to be satirizing. The radiation theory says America has been living downstream of its own industrial choices and calling the results normal. The coma theory says the things we hold on to when we are losing everything tell us more about who we are than anything we do when we have nothing to lose. The Burns immortality theory says wealth in sufficient quantities becomes indistinguishable from a different kind of biology. The collective denial theory says the mechanism by which communities avoid accountability for institutional harm is not stupidity or malice, but a rational calculation about what the community can survive knowing. The Mona Simpson theory says what is done to parents echoes forward into their children in ways that look like character, but are really wounds wearing characters' clothes. None of these are comfortable observations. All of them are in the show. The show put them there. Whether it meant to or whether they accumulated through 36 years of smart writers observing America carefully is a question the theories do not require you to answer. The observations are in the show either way. You just have to be willing to look. Tonight you looked. Sleep well. One last thing. The show has been on for 36 years. It has never explained itself. It has never stepped out of character long enough to tell you what it is trying to say. It just keeps running, episode after episode, season after season, the same town and the same family and the same cracked towers and the same couch, producing in its accumulated mass of hours and seasons and moments something that no individual episode was designed to produce. A record. Of a town and a family and a country at a specific moment in its history that is somehow extended across 4 decades without resolving. A record of what it looks like when things do not change even though they should. When the damage keeps happening and the fish keeps having 3 eyes and the safety inspector keeps sleeping at his post. When the man at the top stays at the top through mechanisms nobody is quite sure how to challenge. When the town keeps forgetting what happened to it and the family keeps surviving on love alone. The Simpsons is 36 years of a cartoon telling you the truth about where you live, in a voice gentle enough that you can fall asleep to it, which is exactly what it was designed to be, and exactly what it is. Good night, the close. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We started with the nuclear power plant and worked through what it means that the central economic institution of a town has been systematically contaminating that town's population for over 3 decades without anyone being able to sustain the awareness of it long enough to do anything about it. We followed that contamination through the bodies and the behaviors of the people who have been living inside it, through the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the 3-eyed fish and the safety inspector who cannot hold a critical thought long enough to act on it, through the cracked towers and the chewing gum patches and the human skeletons in the basement that nobody ever asks about. Then we went inside Homer's head and sat with the possibility that everything since April 1993 is a dream. That the reset at the end of every episode is not a production convention but a choice being made by a dreaming brain that will not write the scene in which the story ends. We looked at what it means that God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. We thought about what it means that nobody in Springfield ages, and why the coma theory explains this with a precision and an emotional clarity that no other framework manages. We reopened the Burns shooting and found a verdict that was declared before it was reached. We counted the things that do not add up. The clue Burns himself called a coincidence. The contest nobody won. The fully produced alternate endings. Homer's unaddressed confession a decade after the case was closed. The final image that can mean 2 completely different things. We traced Burns's impossible age through weekly radiation treatments and a century of engineered survival through the closed economic loop that makes Springfield dependent on Burns's continued existence and makes Burns's continued existence dependent on the infrastructure his wealth provides. We sat with what it means that the town cannot afford to let him die, because dying would require accounting for what he did while he was alive. We went to that gymnasium in Season 9 and watched Springfield vote to unknow the truth, watched the legal decree get issued, watched the last honest man get tied to a train and sent away, and understood for the first time what the mechanism is behind every reset and every forgotten catastrophe in the show's history. The amnesia is not only the product of damaged brains, it is also a collective choice that a community makes when the truth is more expensive than the lie. We sat behind Maggie's pacifier and thought about what is actually in there. The shooting and the strategic concealment afterward. The longest daycare and the 7 minutes of flawless operational problem-solving from a person whose body can barely keep up with her mind. The lesson she drew from watching Lisa, the opposite lesson, the one about silence and invisibility, and the power that accumulates in a person who is never suspected of anything. We wondered what she is waiting for and did not arrive at an answer because the show has never given one. We sorted through the predictions, the ones that hold up and the ones that do not, and the larger picture that confirms bias produces from a big enough dataset processed through a selective enough filter. And then we sat with the more interesting possibility that the show does not predict the future so much as it normalizes what comes to feel inevitable, that the cultural preparation the show provides for certain outcomes makes those outcomes feel like recognition rather than surprise when they arrive. We followed Mona Simpson from a quiet Springfield housewife in 1969 to a federal fugitive and traced the wreckage of that transformation through 3 generations of Simpsons, through Abe's deal and Homer's wound, and the perfect brokenness that made Homer exactly the employee Burns needed for exactly the job Burns needed him to have. We sat with what it means that Homer has worked his entire adult life for the man who destroyed his family and has never been able to hold that fact clearly enough to act on it. We looked for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere. We thought about why the show has maintained the geographic ambiguity for 36 years and what it protects, what it prevents, what it means that a town without a fixed location cannot be held accountable for anything that happens inside it. We stared at the floating timeline and understood what it is actually saying. That time does not work inside Springfield. That the characters are locked. That the lock is not a production convenience, but a symptom of something structural inside the show's world and also something structural inside the audience's relationship to the show. That the loop is ours. That we built it. That we keep it running every time we turn the show on and let it be the familiar thing it has been for the entirety of our adult lives, or the entirety of our childhoods, or the entirety of both. We met Hans Moleman and did not find an answer, and understood that not finding an answer was itself a kind of answer. We sat with Ned Flanders and the full weight of what it means to spend a lifetime being compliant and kind in a system that was not designed to notice or reward either of those qualities. And we remembered that God talks to Homer and does not talk to Ned, and we let that mean what it means. Every theory we covered tonight is different. Everyone uses different evidence and different logic and different assumptions about what the show is and what it is trying to say and what kind of story it tells about the people trapped inside it. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the Burns shooting mystery, the immortality question, the collective denial revealed by the principal and the pauper, Maggie's strategic silence, the prediction phenomenon, the Mona Simpson conspiracy, the geographic impossibility, the floating timeline, the small mysteries of Moleman and Ned. They are all different. They proceed from different starting points, and they arrive at different specific conclusions. But all of them arrive at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something structural. Something that goes deeper than animation style or episodic television convention or cartoon logic. Whether it is radiation or a coma or collective denial or institutional corruption or the sheer accumulated weight of 36 years of not being allowed to change, something has broken the rules of normal reality inside this town. And the show has been pointing at this since the first episode. Not through announcements or dramatic revelations, through the patient, systematic accumulation of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture emerges even when you were not looking for it. The Simpsons is not hiding its mysteries. It is showing them to you every single week. It is just that nobody in Springfield can see them, and nobody in the audience can fully see them either. Because we have been watching long enough that we have become Springfield. We have absorbed the yellow skin and the four fingers, and the ageless children, and the immortal billionaire, and the town that cannot find itself on a map. We have normalized all of it. We look at a three-eyed fish and we think, well, that is just how things are around here. It has always been that way. It will always be that way. But the theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to accept the surface. They dug. They connected. They asked the questions the characters cannot ask because the characters are trapped inside the loop. And what they found is a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one the show presents at face value. A version where Homer's stupidity is not a character trait but a scar left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to understand what was being broken. Where Maggie's silence is the most sophisticated strategy anyone in the family has ever deployed. Where Burns's longevity is the logical conclusion of what happens when unchecked wealth is applied without limit to the problem of personal mortality. Where Marge's patience is the structural foundation without which the whole fragile construction collapses. Where Bart's rebellion is the only genuinely sane response available in a world that has stopped making sense. And where Lisa, 8 years old, brilliant, tired, relentless, keeps asking questions that nobody around her wants answered, because she is the only person in Springfield who has never fully stopped looking. That is The Simpsons. 36 seasons, over 780 episodes, the longest-running animated series in the history of American television. The most analyzed and theorized and obsessively examined show ever produced. And after all of it, after all the theories and all the evidence and all the hours spent trying to understand what is actually happening inside those yellow walls, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can we not let them go? Maybe because they are us. Maybe Springfield is our town in some way that does not require a specific geographic location,